One of my summer sons.
Nice.
All right. Well, we are going to get going. Welcome, everyone. Welcome on behalf of the League of Oregon Cities and the Oregon Mayors Association. We want to thank you for participating. I'm Keith Mays, Mayor of the City of Sherwood and your 2021 President of the League of Oregon Cities. We have an exciting day ahead, starting with a great lineup of speakers. To start off this afternoon, we'll be briefed by the League of Oregon Cities intergovernmental relations staff on priority legislative issues for cities. Later in the afternoon, we'll be hearing from the House Republican leader, Christine Drazan, Senate President Peter Courtney, House Speaker Tina Kotek, and Assistant Senate Republican leader Lynn Finley. The governor will close out the presentation today, part of today's program at 5 o'clock. Of the program, and then at 5 o'clock we'll be hosting a reception with the regional breakout rooms so you can network with your legislative delegation. A couple of reminders before we continue. Make sure to mute yourself when you're not actively speaking. Be sure to look through the material on the City Day platform. There are detailed summary documents of everything we'll be discussing today. We want you to get the most out of City Day, so please don't hesitate to let one of the LOC staff know if they can be of any assistance in the chat box. As you know, the Oregon Mayors Association has been a long time collaborative partner with the LOC for City Day at the Capitol and a co-sponsor of this unique event. I would like now to introduce my colleague, the president of the Oregon Mayors Association and the mayor of the city of Dayton, the Honorable Beth Witowski.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. Thank you to all of you today for joining us as we kick off our legislative day. Before we dive into today's program, I just want to share my perspective about why it's so important that we're all here today. There are more than 200 city officials attending this conference from all across the state, representing nearly 90 cities. As mayors and councilors of Oregon cities, we represent the same cross-section of constituents as the legislators that we seek to speak with today. As local leaders, each of us are responsible for setting and implementing policies in our communities, and we know that the best decisions are made locally. Your participation today will ensure that our message is heard in Salem. We can be most effective in delivering our message by supporting the League's advocacy efforts. This means working with our legislators, both at home and through the legislative process, and the networking is invaluable. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce my good friend and the executive director of the League of Oregon Cities, Mr. Mike Culley.
I am your good friend, and it's your birthday, and I want to start with that and saying happy birthday to you from myself and from everybody on this call.
Happy birthday!
You can't hide. You can't hide.
Thank you, everybody.
So happy birthday. Mike. As luck would have it, I'm doing dual duty right now. So I'm on this, and I'm also on our first call with the White House. Got a last minute invitation from the White House IGA team to join them and meet them and listen to their priorities. And I think the promising takeaway that I've heard so far is that they're accessible, and I now have everybody's phone number and email address at the White House, because what happens there trickles down to what happens here. So when I'm finished here, I'm getting back on that call. But I did want to speak to what's happening here today and the importance of what's happening here today. City Day, something that we've done historically since this league was founded almost 100 years ago. This is the cornerstone of what we do. And I think we've got a rock star team to really do what we do best, and that's advocate for cities. You're going to meet our team here shortly and hear about them. They have, in this most unusual year, already gone through, sorted, figured out what they're going to prioritize based on the legislative committees. More than 3,200 bills that dropped in the first just couple of days here. So to say they have their hands full is really an understatement. And the fact that they're pulling this off today and have organized such a great program is nothing short of amazing. Our legislative priorities are clear. If you haven't seen it, we've launched our new website, We did that last year in the midst of this pandemic, and just in time, because that's been a great connector. You can get on there, you can see our priorities. I know Jim McCauley, our legislative director, will be talking with you about that. Also, we are going to ramp up our efforts in terms of communication with you this year. You are likely aware that we do our Friday calls every morning at 10 a.m. We're going to continue those and tweak them as things happen and developments happen, and they're going to continue to be a relevant source of information to you as city leaders. And we thank you for participating in that. And above all, we thank you for leading. This is certainly nothing you signed up to do or had no idea it was going to be like this when you signed up to do this. I can tell you too that our legislative team is going to keep you abreast of what's happening. We have a number of vehicles to do that in podcasts. Many of you have attended some of the one-off calls that we've had on Friday afternoons that have dealt with legislative subjects, and we're going to continue to do those and seek opportunities to connect with you. And I want to close just by saying, you know, the effectiveness of our organization really hinges on you and your participation too. And I can't say this enough, but the stories that you bring, the connections that you have with your legislators and lawmakers here in the state, they matter. That really matters. And if you don't know them, you need to get to know them. And this is one of those touch points that I really hope you take advantage of when you're going into the breakout rooms and when you're experiencing City Day at the Capitol. Consider this a launch point for that relationship. But that's how things get done with those relationships, the stories that you have and can come forward with from your communities. They make a difference. It matters. Finally, before I hand it back, I just want to again thank you for being a part of this. It means a lot to us. We're only as effective as what we have behind us. All 241 cities. Today, we have 90 of those cities represented, at least, with over 200 of you participating in this day. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll close and turn this back to President Mays.
Thank you, Mike. Next, I want to, next up, we're going to hear from the League of Oregon Cities advocacy team. Please welcome our legislative director, Mr. Jim McCauley.
Afternoon, everybody. Glad that you got a chance to come on to this. And what I'm going to offer is we've got a slate to basically walk you through all of our priorities for session. There'll be an opportunity to answer questions at the end. So if you've got some questions as we kind of go through these presentations, certainly write them down. We want to be able to address them as we get through. The other thing too is when you do have questions at the end, and I'll try to repeat this or remember this as well, but wave your hand as opposed to going into chat and things of that nature. It'll help this process work a little bit better. So looking at our session here for 2021, I think the numbers we usually start out with are kind of what the makeup looks like. We have a Senate that still has Democratic control with 18 members, 11 Republicans, and 1 independent. In the House, we have 37 Democrats as well as 23 Republicans. Effectively, we're not much of a different place than we were back in 19 or in 2020. Democrats have control. They don't have a supermajority, but they have enough control over effectively controlling what the calendar looks like and the issues that are in front of all of us. One thing that's important to understand, I think, as well, is before every session, there's quite a bit of education that takes place from the government affairs team itself. We end up doing our very best to get in front of legislators in advance and try to walk them through what our priorities look like. This time around, we had around 20 new members of the legislature as a result of the election cycle, but also some retirements during the last session, as well as even one in progress right now with Senator Olson, who's stepping away, but his replacement won't be named probably for at least another week. So we're still we don't have a complete set of legislators. And that can kind of make it a little bit difficult. But bottom line is we get out there, we do our best to educate everybody. And we had an opportunity certainly to sit down with most of the new legislators coming on board, as well as leadership. That's another important angle that we end up getting in front of. So we've already had a chance to sit down with the governor. We've had a chance to sit down with the Senate President's office. Next week, we'll be sitting down with the Speaker's side, and we'll be making the same rounds within the Republican caucus in both of the chambers. I think the message that I've got for everybody to start out with is something that you probably heard me say virtually every week during our statewide calls, is the importance of advocacy and the importance of the grassroots piece of that. We have proven as a league in the past the ability to stop bills in their tracks because of members like yourself who are participating today, who take these calls to action seriously and really do make an effort out there to contact your legislators. We don't have campaign money. We don't have a PAC, but what we've got is a critical link to those state legislators that are representing part of your districts and part of your cities. Your constituents are their constituents. The difference is you're basically on the front line. You're part of that main street face that everybody sees in the grocery stores or gas stations or what have you. The balance of, I think that, I'll say the decision-making, both at the committee level, leadership, is really part of that grassroots for us, is what helps balance it with some of those other organizations out there that have got money behind them. And I think that's why it's important to continue to emphasize the importance of that grassroots component. Our priorities this session, as you know, were a result of 7 policy committees that convened over the spring and the summer of 2020. And I want to thank everybody who was involved in those policy committees and those who've had a chance to provide input during that process. It was a very different effort from what had been done before. Obviously, we've all been remote since March. Our policy committees were no different, but it still takes an awful lot of work to be able to listen and review and evaluate a lot of the issues that were brought up. Because I'm guessing, I don't have a full count, but I'm guessing they were certainly in the hundreds. So out of that process, we had 26 priorities that the entire membership got a chance to vote on over the summer. Those were narrowed down into basically 7 priorities out there. They include mental health investment, COVID-19 economic recovery, comprehensive infrastructure package, property tax reform, which has been there before, housing and services investment, water utility and rate assistance, and then disaster relief and recovery was an item that was actually added by the board while they were going through the, I'll say, the approval process of what those priorities were. And that's really kind of the makeup of where our focus is going to be this session. We'll be able to get a little bit deeper dive into that as we move into our portfolio managers. We've got a different staff this session than what we had when I first came on board back in 2018 and into the 2019 session. I'm really happy with the group that we've got right now. And it's an incredibly strong group of professionals who are certainly experts in the portfolios that they cover. And from my perspective, I think they know those issues better than a lot of the competition in the building as far as other lobby groups go and other interests. Mark Garst is new to LOC from Department of Revenue. Mark covers finance and taxation along with economic development. Ariel Nelson, new to LOC from Oregon Housing and Community Services. Ariel covers the land use, housing, and eminent domain. Jenna Jones, not new to LOC. She's been carrying telecom, broadband, and cable. In this session, she's going to be helping out with some PUC issues as we go forward. Tracy Retton Rainey has been covering water, wastewater, environment, natural resources, energy, and public contracting for years. And then Scott Winkles, ethics, public safety, community corrections, courts, personnel, PERS, collective bargaining. He's probably got the biggest portfolio of all of us, and I think is probably tracking somewhere north of around 500 bills. Before we get into the individual portfolios, I'd like to have Tracy Rutten Rainey cover an organizational priority, which was really part of our priority setting process this time. It really does define how we evaluate every piece of legislation that we've had a chance to go through so far this year. As Mike mentioned, we understood that there's I'll say a pre-session filing, or essentially a pre-session interest in around 3,200 bills. We don't know if all of those are going to actually come to fruition. We're probably tracking at this point right around 1,000 bills between all of the government relations staff. So I'd like to turn this over to Tracy.
Thank you and good afternoon. Again, I am Tracy Rutten Rainey. I just got married last summer, so I'm transitioning to the new last name for those of you who've known me from before. I am going to take just a few minutes to talk about the LOC organizational priority for 2021, though arguably I think this priority carries forward to future legislative sessions and conversations that we anticipate that we'll have. And really, we as staff developed this priority and made this recommendation to our board of directors, really knowing that going into this legislative session that we would need to be even more committed to utilizing our grassroots advocacy strategies in a virtual format for a session, and also trying to really make the case and speak the right language around home rule authority and what that means and why it is more important than arguably ever before with the past year that we've had, that the legislature really understand the impact that some of their decisions can have in either helping or making our jobs more difficult at the local level. And I think, as we go into this session in terms of just the grassroots piece of this, and we've carried this message before, so you've probably heard it before if you've participated in past events like this. But really this session is going to be unlike any that we, even as a lobby team, have experienced. This virtual setting is very new to everyone, legislators included, and legislative staff in the building that are, I will say, I have to commend the work that they're putting in to try and pull this all together and make it successful. But it's a learning curve for everyone. I think you layer that in with the number of bills that Jim mentioned. I know there's more coming, as well as the number of committees. We actually have, I believe, 51 committees this session, which is actually a considerable amount more than what we have seen in previous sessions. And so while we're virtual, it doesn't appear the legislature is shying away from having a lot of conversations around a lot of bills and in a lot of settings, via the committee process. I think, in terms of what we're seeing also, there are some pretty significant concepts that are at play this session. And so the grassroots advocacy component is going to be really important. I think, the upside and benefit to a virtual setting, however, is going to be that I hope and believe that it's going to be even easier for some of our members that typically have a hard time driving to Salem to be able to provide testimony before committees and participate in the process and really tell their story when we're making a case, either for or against certain legislation. So really just strongly push for that grassroots advocacy as we go into the session. They see us a lot. And I think in this virtual setting, they're going to hear from lobbyists all the time. And I'm even seeing in some of the appointments that I'm scheduling that they're starting to get to a few weeks out. I hope, and it should be the case, that if they get a call from their local elected officials or city managers or other city staff, that you might be able to cut into line to be able to get that message to them quicker. And so we're really going to rely on that grassroots advocacy from all of you. And you guys tell the local stories. That's where that discussion ought to be, is in local examples and really spelling out what these overarching or, kind of seemingly large issues mean at the local level. So moving into kind of the organizational priority itself, we're really just encouraging the legislature not only to partner with us and see us as a partner in serving shared constituencies, but really understanding the core services that cities provide that those constituents rely on, and understanding that the more that they layer on in terms of unfunded mandates or impeding upon the ability of local elected officials and cities to solve problems at the local level and to find those solutions. We are already unfortunately seeing a number of bills that really do, I think infringe upon the home rule authority of cities. And we've talked as a staff really about it's the message that you can't tell us to do that, state, you can't tell us to do X, Y, or Z doesn't really sit well with legislators. They need to understand truly what those impacts look like. And that maybe if we want to go down the path of an unfunded mandate, it's going to mean that the resources aren't able to provide some of the critical services that you've prioritized at the local level. So we really do want to just kind of make that case today to all of you. You've heard it before, of really engaging with your legislators, really taking the time to help them understand the ways that these types of decisions impact your ability to deliver the core services that your citizens need right now. You guys know what they need the best. We certainly want to partner with the state to find tools, but we've got to have flexibility. I think as everyone who's probably participating knows, one size fits all approaches rarely work well. And so that's the organizational priority that we want to make sure is at the forefront of everyone's minds going into the session. I will just make one more note, which is that we do have a number of legislators that are new that have direct local government background and experience. And so we're really going to target to do some outreach education with those members. It's really encouraging to see that and to have those local government perspectives represented in the legislature. And I think with that, Jim, are we ready to get into the specific priorities?
Yeah, I think go ahead and you're first up.
Okay, great. So next slide, please. Okay, great. And as Jim mentioned, I do cover water issues for the league and all things natural resource and environment related, as well as public contracting. So I'm going to quickly go over just a few of the water related bills that we'll be anticipating working on the session. First up is House Bill 2739 and LC. So it just came out and is not yet a bill number 1486. And that is a bill that we requested to have introduced as a committee bill. And this would establish a statewide water and wastewater assistance program in Oregon. This is one of our LOC legislative priorities for the session, really to address the need that we see. And I think that has long existed prior to COVID, but I think been highlighted and made further challenging in communities as a result of COVID. But this would establish assistance to help Oregonians pay drinking water and sewer bills. There are some low-income assistance programs out there. Those are where they do exist, and they don't exist statewide and in every community. They're borne by local utility rates. And so there's really limitation in a community's ability to offer additional assistance without increasing water rates to pay for it. So we're hearing from a lot of communities. I think my ask today for you all would be to please let us know, please email me, contact me if your community is experiencing these challenges. We're going to need a lot of testimony. We're going to really need to make our case going into the session about the need that we see. Two other bills that I want to mention. I know there's a few on an additional slide, but House Bill 2344, this one came out of the LOC Water Wastewater Committee as a recommendation. And this bill will require manufacturers of wipes products. So cleaning wipes, makeup, removal wipes, personal care wipes, baby wipes, to adhere to a statewide labeling standard. And this bill is in response to what we've heard from a lot of our wastewater providers who are really struggling to deal with the impacts that these products are having on their wastewater systems, causing clogs and impacting infrastructure as well. We're having a number of infrastructure related issues and just the time that staff is taking to try and deal with this problem. So this bill, we're very hopeful will move through this session. We've done a lot of groundwork to get other stakeholders on board. The other issue here is House Bill 2144. I won't go into great detail, but just to say if you have any water that you're storing currently This is a bill you should pay attention to. This bill will allow you to transfer stored water for different types of uses. So if you need to change what you're using that water for or where you're storing that water, this bill is something you should watch. And next slide, please. I will not go into great detail other than to say that we are going to be doing some work to address harmful algal blooms and just making sure that the state has the resources to be able to process lab samples from communities. We are certainly aware that with wildfires, there may be an increased incidence of harmful algal blooms that could impact drinking water systems. So that is something that we'll be working on. You may recognize this bill from last session, House Bill 2310. Pipe preemption legislation that was something we opposed in the 2020 session that would preempt local government, if they're using state funding for a water project, from having design specifications in place that limit the types of pipes that they use. We do anticipate this could have a public hearing again. We're really concerned. One of the things we noted in 2020 when we were in opposition to this bill was concern over potential impacts from wildfires and melting of plastic pipes. We're learning more about that phenomenon out of California, and unfortunately now a number of communities experiencing that in Oregon. We want to make sure communities can make decisions locally about the types of pipes that work best for their water projects. And so we'll continue to oppose this legislation, and we'll need to rely on you guys to help us with that lift. There are just a few water infrastructure funding pieces in there that are noted on the slide. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we will continue to make the case for additional water infrastructure investment in this session. Next slide, please. Okay, there it is. Public contracting. There are a number of bills that we're seeing that we have seen before. So I actually want to say that every bill that is on this slide are bills that we have seen in previous sessions. There are a number of bills that are dealing with the issue of prevailing wage and looking to make changes to how prevailing wage is determined, including a bill, House Bill 2597, that reduces the number of regions for looking at what wages should apply. So when they do the study to determine the wage rates, they break that down into regions to reflect the local wages. And this would take it from 14 to 5. Obviously, that does pull in some rural communities with some larger urban areas, and we are concerned about that and want to make sure that if we make any changes to the regions, that we get that right and that it is reflective of local wages. The other bills that I want to make sure that I do flag are House Bill 2324. This would require private construction projects to pay prevailing wage and to abide by prevailing wage laws for if there is an enterprise zone tax abatement that is being received. So we're concerned that that would, essentially negate the incentive that we feel has been pretty effective. Mark may be able to spend a little more time on this one. But this bill has certainly been around before and probably is familiar to a number of you. And then the final bill is House Bill 2419 and Senate Bill 493. Again, looking at changing how we determine prevailing wage rate and basically establishing that if there's a collective bargaining agreement in place, that does determine the wage rate instead of the survey that is done to look at wages. And so our concern, Washington passed something similar, and we have heard some concerns out of jurisdiction of Washington that saw rates increase from, for one occupation in particular, from about $17 an hour to nearly $60 an hour. So it did create some anomalies and challenges in their system. And next slide, please. I'll just, as I'm waiting for that slide to pull up, just say there are a lot of big bills in the environment, energy, recycling space. And I know I'm running short on time, so I'll do a little time check with Jim if I can. But certainly these are all issues that we're going to be engaged with this session. Pretty significant changes coming down for potentially for recycling system modernization. I really recommend that communities take a look at both House Bill 2065 and 2592. They're pretty significant pieces of legislation. LOC did have a representative on a 2-year work group, and that work group recommended the language that is now reflected in House Bill 2065. And so we are working in support of that bill, in supporting the work that went into that 2-year process. We certainly know there may be cities that prefer the other bill. So I'd love to hear from folks once they've had a chance to take a look at that legislation. But I think that I will pass it on because I know I'm a little bit over my time to the next speaker.
You're doing great. You're doing great. So next up, and again, as I mentioned earlier, let's hold questions until the end. So certainly mark what you'd like to have answered. Let's go with Scott Winkles.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Scott Winkles. I've been a lobbyist with the League of Oregon Cities for going on 14 years now, maybe a little longer. It's my pleasure to represent your interests on all things general government and everything in the human resources portfolio. That general government includes public health and safety, and which this session will include some investments in behavioral health. And with that, could I get the next slide? So the League came up with, through the General Government Committee, some very specific goals for improvements into our mental health system. Those specific goals are really based on the fact that Oregon's never invested an amount that's commensurate with the need when it comes to behavioral health or addiction services. One of those priorities is something that we are looking to accomplish administratively outside of the legislative process with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. There was some general recognition among our membership and among law enforcement that alcohol consumption is causing a lot of challenge, excessive alcohol consumption, and particularly alcohol consumption at that lower price point. So look for some developments out of the OLCC in regards to increasing the price for some of the cheaper items. It's not what's happening with tobacco, where we're trying to discourage people to quit. It's just a price point that's going to add a little bit of drag onto the consumption, and that's the goal there. The major bill we're going to be talking about in terms of behavioral health for this session is House Bill 2086. This was actually introduced at the request of the governor, and it accomplishes most of the goals that the League is looking for out of a mental health, behavioral health addictions package. One, it's going to expand the availability of crisis services around the state, whether it's in forms of crisis lines or in-person treatment, and that's going to be based around a broad definition of equity to include make sure rural residents have this access to this care, regardless of language, regardless of nation of origin. The bill's also, and this part is really important, probably should have led with this one. It's going to expand the access to respite care. One of the great challenges with our behavioral health system is that there's very few options for people who are in crisis who can go and be safe, stabilized medically. And what is happening around the state is that people are getting into a crisis. They're having negative interactions with law enforcement, and that's not the way these people are going to get better. I think we want to get them into a medical facility where a patient can be treated like a patient. The bill also has a point that I think has been lost in a lot of the previous conversations around behavioral health, and that the workforce in the state is insufficient. Depending on the survey and the methodology, Oregon either ranks last or dead last when it comes to access to behavioral health care. And the bill is going to look to expand that workforce from the entry level, from the staff at a community home, all the way up to the PhD and the psychiatrist level. So look for some more information on this bill, and I think the real conversation on this is going to when it gets to Ways and Means, where we start talking about how much money we're going to we're going to put into these programs. But it's certainly something we would hope that you would talk to your legislators about. Could I get the next slide, please? Also in my portfolio, we're looking at a lot of conversation around police reforms. And this is an area where the league has some objectives and goals in terms of we'd like to proactively accomplish. You know, the league has been advocating for expanded management rights when it comes to discipline and termination for significant misconduct in all classifications, but particularly in police collective bargaining. The number of officers that get reinstated through the arbitration process who simply don't belong in the profession has been appalling for a long time. And actually, what's really concerning is that we probably lead the nation in terms of officers' discipline. So if we have a problem, I think some of our neighbors are in pretty serious straits. So we will be looking to ensure that a disciplined decision that's arrived through a fair and reasonable due process sticks. I think we also have some bills that we're concerned about. The House Bill 2204 will address qualified immunity, except in a way that doesn't necessarily expand the individual officer's personal liability. I think it expands the employer's liability. And what we've seen is that this doesn't really drive behavior. And so we do have some concerns about that. We also have a new database system bill. It's not that we're opposed to recording discipline or use of force reports. It's we do that already in a couple of different ways. And so we're hoping to shift these into constructive conversations. And then the committee just heard 2931, which required medical exams for all arrestees. As written, I think the bill has some challenges. I think the conversations in the committee are going to get it into a better situation that we can accomplish and will protect health interests of arrestees. I think the concern there was the medical exam would have to be done by a doctor, PA, or a nurse practitioner. Not always good access to that when people are arrested, and a large portion of arrestees never go into custody. So it needs some work. Next slide. This concerns me. Tort liability is going to be a conversation this session. We already saw an informational hearing in the House subcommittee of the House Judiciary on Civil Law yesterday. We're looking at some bills that really would limit our ability to innovate and frankly hurt services. The first one is House Bill 2205, and this allows for a civil action to enforce state laws. So instead of somebody filing a bully complaint, they would secure a legal trial lawyer and take the case that way. When California enacted this legislation, they had a exponential increase in the number of claims. The bully process allows for a resolution for issues that the civil action system simply doesn't. And so we are concerned about this bill. It was introduced in the last session. Somehow it got the nickname the Bounty Hunter Bill, but hopefully with this, we'll move on from this session as well. House Bill 2207, this is the budget buster. I think I oppose this one a lot. This eliminates the tort cap for local governments. And I think this is going to have an impact on a lot of the things that cities want to try and cities want to do. And especially when we're in this transformative time, this would expose cities to risk for any number of issues. It's not just police misconduct claims, which usually are filed federally, but if you'll be exposed to more risk if you're adding additional services to serve the houseless population. I think if we want to shift to using behavioral health specialists to respond to certain calls that are currently done by the police, or reach out to actively work with your persons who we know to be in near crisis, I think you're exposed to additional liability, and that creates a lot of challenges for a city moving forward. We do have some bills in the tort liability area that we do support. 2638 would allow a tort immunity for a good faith actor for a COVID claim. And so if your city has followed the OHA guidelines, the CDC guidelines in terms of masking, sanitation, all those things, then you would be immune from tort claims. So this would protect good actors and then leave the bad actors, and we know there are some of those, liable for their claims. And then finally, architects and engineers are back this session. This is a group that does tend to like to be treated differently than other members of the contracting community and the construction community. And so they would like to have us defend them for certain claims resulting from projects when there's a design or engineering flaw. And with that, I see Jim is on the camera, so I'm assuming I've gone over time. So I will turn it over.
I'm your virtual hook.
Play the music.
Yeah, no kidding. No, that's great. Thank you. Mark, you're up next.
All right. Hello, everybody. Mark Arst here. I'm your lobbyist for tax, finance, and economic development. Little bit of conversation today about money. We'll talk about some of the money bills that are out there. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Longstanding priority for the league has been property tax reform. Will this be the year? Can we actually pull off something like that during a virtual session? I think it would be a very hard push, but no matter what, we need to move the ball forward. And if we're going to have any chance of this ever happening, we need to really get the conversation started. We need to, keep it in the spotlight. And so we'll definitely be working on that. We're actively participating in a group that's being led out of Multnomah County right now. So, there are conversations happening already, and there are folks there from both the House and the Senate side who are participating in that conversation as well. Members of the BIPOC community and also the unions are at the table. And, if we were to actually get property tax reform, it's going to be a campaign effort. And so there's going to need to be some money behind it. So conversations are happening. Your policy committee did not send forward a specific proposal for what property tax reform should look like. Instead, they came up with principles, and that's what's guiding us in these conversations. So those principles include local choice, right? So we're not necessarily looking for a big statewide tax increase by any means. What we want is the ability for residents of particular cities to be able to fund a particular service if they want that service. And so that's what we will be advocating for. Equity, we need to get back to some sense of fairness where what folks are paying is at least, somewhat tied to the value of the property that they're paying the taxes on. We've gotten a long way from that. We're over 30 years out now with this current system, and some of the differences have gotten really stark. And particularly in Multnomah County, we've seen some really kind of disgusting effects of the property tax system. You have a lot of rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods where folks are moving in. They're pushing out, kind of pricing out people out of that neighborhood, often Black people. And the people who buy the house in the appreciating neighborhood have the best deal in town. The place where people who used to live in that neighborhood get pushed out to kind of East County, they're getting kind of the worst deal, paying much higher percentage of their real market value. So that doesn't work for us. And we really need to get back to equity, both where, folks kind of pay the same depending on the value of the property, and then also to address some of these economic justice concerns. Finally, fairness and adequacy. We're going to have to really think about fairness and what it means for something to be fair. You know, before we had measures 5 and 50, we had a lot of property tax relief for folks. A lot of that was funded by the general fund. A lot of states have something where if your property taxes go above a certain percentage of your adjusted gross income on your income taxes, you get an income tax credit. But whatever we do, we're going to have to come up with something where, you know, folks are still able to stay in their house if they're on a fixed income. So that's going to need to be a big part of any system. Also, we'd be willing, if we're looking at comprehensive reform, we'd be willing to look at something like a homestead exemption that would maybe help out homeowners so that, you know, they don't see a massive tax spike. I'll tell you what my last principle is personally, is to make sure that people don't get left worse off. And that means not just people in Multnomah County, but people all across the state. Whatever system we come up with, it has to work for people in all corners of the state. It has to work for all cities. No city can come out of this tax reform package with less money than what they went in. That would be a failure. So that is what we're looking out for you. You have a few bills up here. Nothing really worth, you know, putting too much time in right now. I will say that, you know, there are some concepts out there. HJR 13 would kind of push everybody towards where their assessed value is 3/4 of their real market value. Again, if we actually did that, it includes bringing down people's taxable values to get to that 75. And there are some counties where people are mostly paying, you know, up in the 80 and 90% of real market value. So that would not work for everybody. That's an example of one with some unintended consequences. And then finally, I'll point you to SJR 11. This is why I kind of have to be the bad guy at the legislature so often. SJR 11 would freeze the property taxes for senior citizens. And I would love to do that. It sounds like a great idea. I mean, I worry about seniors and folks on limited income, but this thing is super expensive. We've looked at it in the past. It's tremendously expensive. And with the current limitations that we have on the property tax system, we really don't have the ability to do that kind of broad property tax relief for seniors. So I will have to go in there and argue against senior property tax relief. Next slide, please. So there are some other bills that are up around property taxes, and they kind of fall into some categories. Here we'll have to be the bad guy again. Senate Bill 545, and there are two other bills that do a similar thing. They significantly increase the property tax exemption for disabled veterans. We have to look at the price tag. We have to think about whether it makes sense. Maybe we can ask for it to be a local choice if it seems like it's really got legs, if it's something that's going to happen. Maybe we can ask that it be means tested, you know, that just because you are a disabled veteran doesn't mean that you have financial problems. A lot of these folks have done quite well for themselves. And so, you know, I think we might have to be a little bit less broad with some of these types of targeted relief concepts for, you know, for people who are very sympathetic cases. So another one that we'll be looking at, there are a number of bills around wildfire and how we deal with kind of the reconstruction after wildfire, how we deal with taxes. I'll tell you right now that if your house burned down, your taxes get prorated. You don't pay property taxes on a house that burned down. So that's the first thing. Now, do we want to give people some relief going forward? I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I might want to, but at the same time, if you ask folks in, you know, Phoenix and Talent, what happened to their tax base when all those homes burned down? Are we really going to keep those off the tax roll for 4 or 5 years when they're rebuilt? What would that do to budgets in Phoenix and Talent? And maybe if the legislature wants to do something for some of these folks, they should come up with some general fund money to do some of it. So, you know, we are working with Representative Marsh on a bill that would give a little bit more favorable proration to folks whose houses burned down. We'll look at each idea individually and we'll make decisions based off of what makes sense for all the cities. And, you know, keeping in mind that cities are going to be asked to step up coming out of these wildfires. They're going to be asked to be putting through a lot of planning permits. They're going to have work to do. And we got to make sure that you guys have the resources to do that work. Senate Bill 167 is just one that I'll throw out there. Here's another one of those ideas. It sounds really good. It says that when I go to appeal my property taxes, I can not just have the lower of my real market value or my maximum assessed value. There's a third consideration, which is what would bring fairness. And so basically it would allow me to look at what my 3 neighbors on my street say we're paying in property taxes and determine whether or not what I'm paying is fair. They actually do this in a lot of states. I don't know if this idea will get any legs, but it's not a good idea for us, especially given how weird our property tax system is, with people really not paying taxes at all related to their value. It would only bring values down. It would not bring anybody's values up. It's just a one-way fix, and it's something that we'll have to oppose. Next slide, please. So a couple other tax programs that we'll be talking about this session. Lodging taxes, not a ton going on. Your policy committee decided not to go after tourism-related spending so much this session. Now, there could be a conversation that happens that we're not going to initiate. Some folks might ask that we be able to do public safety spending and have it be considered tourism-related in high tourism communities. We'll engage, obviously, in those conversations. And we've wanted more flexibility in how we get to use these lodging dollars. So we'll see if it happens. I don't know. I haven't seen the bill yet, but we'll see if that conversation happens. There are some bills that would raise the state lodging tax rate. It had been 1.8%. It recently dropped down to 1.5%. They want to take it back up. It could be spent on different things. So the bill that I have listed there would put that money into housing. And so that would be some money that cities could use to help fund their efforts on housing. So that might be something that we support. Alcohol taxes. There are going to be a big conversation about alcohol taxes. I'm dropping a document into the chat. This bill, 2740, changes the, oh my, am I getting the hook, Jim?
Keep going, Mark. You're good.
All right, House Bill 2740 deals with agent compensation, how much money liquor store owners get when they sell liquor for us. So it would increase their compensation, but the folks who are going to pay for that are you. I'm not going to get into details. Check out that one pager, but if Representative Wilde, Representative Leaf, Representative Lively, Representative Hernandez, Representative Zika, if those guys are your legislators, right now that bill is in House General Government and we do not want to move it to Ways and Means. We want that bill to just die in committee. So give them a call, and you've got the talking points in the document I just posted into the chat. There's another bill that would increase compensation to distilleries when they sell bottles out of like a tasting room. We probably will be okay with that. It's a lot less money and there's some economic development benefits. Marijuana taxes. We are going to lose a ton of money on Measure 110. It takes a lot of the money, the state revenue that would have otherwise gone to us, and it puts it into recovery, treatment, that kind of thing. We need to find a way to fix that. And so first step is going to be to get an increase in the ability for you to do local marijuana taxes. So our rate is currently 3% that you're capped at. We'd like to get it to go up to 10%, and that'll go a ways towards backfill. Last slide, please. Another way that we're going to fill that money, the governor has a special purpose appropriation that she's going to do that would give us at least half of the money that we expect to lose next biennium. We think we'll lose more like 45 million. This would give us 22.5 million to kind of backfill some of those losses. We'll obviously support that. We'll always support money going into the special public works fund. That's a huge infrastructure need of ours, and that helps pay for a lot of that infrastructure. And then finally, we're going to look to see if we can't get some money for those communities who lost a big part of their tax base, and see if we can't get a little bit of revenue to backfill their budgets. And so we'll be working with Representative Marsh on that. That is what I have for you today.
Great. Thanks very much, Mark. Let's move on to Ariel. Obviously, you can tell we have a pretty full plate on what we've seen in a week and a half of session.
All right, can everybody, there I am. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Nelson. I am your league lobbyist for housing and land use. So I don't think we have any bills right now that need immediate action to the legislature necessarily. Before I kind of dive into specific bills, I kind of wanted to share a little bit of context. So we have our housing and services priority as part of the league legislative priorities this session. It's really just broad support for key and critical funding programs that are mostly at Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state's housing agency, to fund everything from homelessness to rent assistance to developing and preserving affordable housing to programs that support affordable home ownership, maintenance of that home ownership, and foreclosure mitigation. So the league is a member of the Oregon Housing Alliance this session, which is a diverse coalition of housing advocates, developers, service providers, local jurisdictions, individual cities, and the league as well. So we will be kind of advocating in partnership with them, supporting what we've seen recommended in the governor's recommended budget, what's in the agency request budget that they're working on. And I'll get into some of those details in a little bit. And that's a time when that, I think that they're hearing that their budget will be scheduled in March. And so leading up to that, I'll be reaching out for advocacy. And if there are those of you who are interested in testifying or meeting with your legislators with LOC, would love to have your support then. So wanted to flag that. But then moving on, in terms of individual bills, we still have a lot of policy bills. And, you all are all familiar that there have been a lot of recent pretty sweeping preemptions when it comes to housing and land use. We're still seeing some of that this session, but we started well before the session in part through our membership in the Housing Alliance, but also just really ensuring that LOC was at some of the kind of early brainstorming tables and conversations around housing policy. We've had a core group of city planners who have been really engaging with other stakeholder partners, sharing cities' needs, cities' perspective, particularly on implementation and how cities are already through their local authority encouraging and promoting development, really looking to support affordable housing, looking to increase development to support the need throughout the state. So we've seen that pay off in that we are working and contributing to bills behind the scenes before they get introduced. So you'll see there's 2 bills on here that don't have bill numbers yet because they haven't been introduced. And there'll be another one I'll talk about in a second that's breaking. The hard part with making materials during session is that they become outdated very quickly. But I'll start with this slide. The first up there is expedited shelter siting, which you will be familiar with from the 2020 session. House Bill 4001 was the number of the bill last session that, as introduced, really broadly preempted cities and said that local governments had to approve emergency shelters kind of at all times and all places. The league engaged very closely and worked very closely with our other city and county partners in Salem to get a lot of improvements to that bill so that cities are able to make sure that applicants that want to site shelter are doing so in appropriate areas, not on natural hazard land, that public safety can be considered. We're not citing these, in next to dangerous industrial areas, those kinds of things. So that bill did not pass in the short session, but it did pass. A version of that bill did pass during one of our special sessions in July, and it was in place for 90 days to kind of reflect the emergency nature of the special session. And we saw at least 5 cities that I've been working with who received applications and cited shelters through that process. And they learned a lot through that process. So we were able to submit some technical changes to the bill that the speaker is reintroducing this session that will give cities the ability to implement this better. In the 2020 session, the league didn't have a position. We were neutral on the bill because we had member cities who were both very much in support of the bill and saw the need to remove shelter siting from the land use process and the appeals process and to quickly expedite it because the need is an emergency. And we also had cities who were opposed because this is a preemption on local control. Since that session and over the summer and since we've been going through the pandemic, we've heard from more and more member cities who are waiting for this bill to come back, who want to support it again. So we have not taken an official position, but continue to provide supporting technical amendments. So we'll see that bill get introduced probably next week, and we'll have a bill number that you'll see pop up on the tracker. Another bill that we've been pretty engaged in, along with AOC and other individual cities and counties, is related to the Martin v. Boise federal decision that at a very high level says that local governments cannot enforce laws that would criminalize the act of being homelessness at all times and all places. So you can't cite someone for sleeping outdoors in public property if they don't have anywhere else to go. The case really gets into whether there's enough shelter involved. LOC has been working in a work group with local government and with the Oregon Law Center on language that would not strictly codify what the case says, but would basically have it make a state equivalent to require that local ordinances that regulate the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry on property outdoors and open to the public has reasonable time, place, and manner limitations. And this was something that the Speaker's office requested and directed us to do. We reached a compromise product with the Oregon Law Center and are in the process of getting Legislative Counsel to reflect what we agreed to in their actual technical draft. Right now, it doesn't actually reflect it. The other piece of this is we were seeking liability protection. If we were going to work on this bill, we've since 2020 have said, when this conversation first came up, that we needed to see some liability protection so that cities didn't felt that they could designate and sanction places to camp or provide, trash services, hand washing, sanitation services, and not be open to liability. So that bill is still very much in flux, and quite a few cities are engaged. Quite a few city attorneys have been incredibly helpful. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me about that. About the third bill on here, I just want to flag and note that there's a big conversation taking place with our partners who deliver the core funding for emergency housing assistance and homeless assistance funding, about what the statute that governs those funds looks like. It's looking at bringing in additional service providers as grantees from the state. Right now, the funds in statute go out to just the Community Action Agency network. And so that's just a bill to flag that is a conversation that you may hear about locally. And if you are hearing about that or being asked to weigh in, I would just be interested to know. It's something that we're, as partners in the service delivery, we want to make sure that funds are reaching communities across the state, and that, we don't have enough providers right now. And so, what are ways that we can be making sure that state resources are being used most efficiently? So next slide, please. While we're waiting for the next slide, I would also just say that the other conversation that is not a bill yet, as Senator Courtney out of Salem, the Senate president, wants to take some next steps on removing barriers to siting affordable housing. And so this is one place where LSC has really appreciated being at the table. We've had planners directly contribute to the technical aspects of the bill. We now have, there's a proposed outline that we're vetting right now that would look at some potential changes that would potentially include some preemptions for cities. And we're having the conversation when there's more details. I will be sharing that with our legislative committee, the LSC Legislative Committee, and other partners to see if this is something we would consider supporting, or what changes we would seek in the bill if there are pieces that are unworkable. But that, again, has not been introduced yet, and we've had the opportunity to contribute and make suggestions rather than having to oppose the bill or seek amendments during session. We're kind of behind the scenes working on that. The bill on the top of this slide just had a hearing today. It wants to take kind of a next step from House Bill 2001. The stakeholders, Habitat for Humanity and home builders, who do a lot of work in developing middle housing, would like to see a uniform, streamlined process when they are subdividing for home ownership. The bill that they've introduced has a lot of problems, so we are working on getting fixes to that and testify to that today. You're also going to see conversation around a bill that is really prioritizing climate justice. House Bill 2488 wants to put a climate justice lens on every single land use goal, and has a lot of new requirements both for the Department of Land Conservation and Development and for local governments that are just simply not realistic in terms of cities' capacity, resources, access to data that doesn't exist. So we're working closely with other stakeholders, regardless of your feelings of support for pursuing climate justice and the effects of climate change and the need to plan for that. The way this bill is drafted is really just not going to be implementable, and it is one of those unfunded mandates that we look for. So we understand that there are conversations being had about narrowing the scope of the bill. There's already work going on at DLCD similar to this through the climate friendly and equitable rulemaking process from the governor's executive order, and many cities and counties are engaged in that. So we will definitely be monitoring this one. There's also a bill that I want to flag for you, 2556. It hasn't been scheduled for a hearing yet, but this is a bill coming from Thousand Friends. They want to expand the required delivery area for land use notices. So within the UGB right now, for land use notices, cities have to mail notice within 100 feet of the subject property. This would move to 600 feet or about a block. It would also notably, right now the law only requires notice to property owners, and this would expand it to all listed properties, so to include renters. So I need to get a sense from working with, reached out to a couple cities, but if anyone can share specifics, what would be the impact on your operations? Is there a fiscal impact? How burdensome is this? If you have feelings about the policy reasons behind that, we're kind of scratching our heads a little bit. I think that there's definitely a argument for expanding from renters or from property owners to renters, but this one's a little different. So next slide, please. There is another bill for increased housing density near transit. You may have remembered Senate Bill 10 from 2019. House Bill 2558 this session, I will say, is a much more reasonable bill, and it's much more limited. It's really only going to apply to those local governments that have fixed rail, fixed guideway transit. So if you're one of those and you want to share your thoughts on this bill, please reach out. We're also providing feedback on House Bill 2918. Representative Williams, who represents the Hood River area and parts of into eastern Multnomah County, wants to stand up an inventory of surplus land for the state that affordable housing developers could have access to, and it would be publicly posted so they could consider properties that they might be suitable for affordable housing. So working with her to make sure that this is done in a way that is workable for local governments. It would basically be a once a year requirement that if you have surplus land, you send DLCD a list of what that is, and they post it on their website. So hoping that we can work with her on language that is workable. And if this raises concerns for you, again, please reach out. Under annexation, the two bills listed there we have seen before. They are pretty much exactly the same. We opposed them in the past, and we will oppose them again. If you are a city where annexation is a key issue for you, or you engaged on this bill in the past, please do reach out. I'd love to tap you for testimony or written testimony, or working with your legislator. Next slide, please. And then these are just three wetlands bills that they're not negative. They may be positive for us. I don't know that they're going to see a lot of traction, but in terms of wetlands as an issue area that I know some of our members are, very cued in on, just wanted you to be aware of them. I don't, not anything to have concerns necessarily, but if you're interested, those are ones you want to track. Next slide, please. Here we get into the budget. So there's two key budgets that I'm focusing on. The DLCD budget is going to be heard towards the end of February. So if this is something you're interested in, please reach out and I can include you in our advocacy. The really key piece is the top policy option package there. That's their budget package. It's going to be, it's 3.9 million in funding that is going to cover their existing housing staff that were hired to implement House Bills 2001 and 2003. That work is still ongoing, and cities are just starting to have to comply with 2003. So we need those staff on board to continue running those programs. And we also critically need $2.5 million of this is grants and technical assistance direct to local governments to meet these requirements. And DLCD is working to ensure that those funds will also be available for cities smaller than 10,000 in population, so that it can go beyond the work for just 2001 and 2003. And I will say this, it's, for our purposes, the work that and the needs of local government and updating code and making your comprehensive plans really responding to your local need and doing the updates that you need. We're going to need more technical assistance funding, but we really need expert staff at DLCD to understand the links and the
we may need to shift because it looks like Ariel's froze. So Jenna, why don't we go ahead and go to you?
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'll just start to next slide. Hi, I'm Jenna Jones. For those who don't know me, I am the telecommunications, broadband, cable, right-of-way management lobbyist. So the first thing that I want to talk about is our infrastructure priority and how it relates to broadband. And so the big ask here will be a big budget ask. The good thing is there was a lot of money allocated in the governor's recommended budget. We will see that number most likely get cut down to some extent. But there's a lot of money for broadband, so that's good. There was $100 million in bonds allocated in the governor's budget for infrastructure grants through Business Oregon. There was something similar that happened with CARES Act money for COVID for broadband grants that was $20 million and was incredibly oversubscribed. So we know the need is there, and we know that people are ready to move on certain projects. So we're excited to see that. When we talk about broadband infrastructure, I do want to highlight that we really want to make sure that any projects related to broadband infrastructure do not preempt municipalities from participating as their own provider. As you know, Oregon has a handful of municipally owned broadband systems, and we want to make sure that that is an option as we're going forward. So that's something that I'm really going to be working hard on. It's not always the most popular opinion of providers to compete with municipalities, but the thing is they're doing great work and connecting really hard areas that other people can't make a business case. We're also going to make sure that these monies aren't only just for municipalities to own their own broadband infrastructure, but to allow for public-private partnerships, because we also recognize that some cities do not want to own their own broadband system. The other thing that we're looking at as far as a budget ask that will relate to broadband infrastructure is the State Broadband Office has been around since 2018, and it has one person. It has been staffed with one person, and it has a gigantic mission and to do technical assistance and to get money out the door, and one person's just not enough. So right now I think the budget has a request for 4 FTE at the State Broadband Office, and we really will support them staffing up the broadband office. In addition, that will help with some technical assistance and any more funding that can go towards planning, not just infrastructure in the ground. One of the biggest barriers when we talk about broadband infrastructure and being eligible for federal grants and things like that is having a broadband strategic plan in place. And if you are in a small community and you don't have that big of a staff, it's really hard to get these broadband strategic plans in place. So having some kind of technical assistance will be great to have. So next slide. I will also just plug really quickly that all of us have done bill watch lists in the resources, so please feel free to check those out. I'm only going to go over some really high-level broadband bills. There are other ones related to digital equity that are fantastic on my watch list. I recommend you go look at that. But the 2 big ones I wanted to mention were House Bill 2410, which is a bill that we are currently opposed to. It is a bill that would prohibit public bodies, including cities, from contracting with internet service providers who don't offer low income rate program for residential customers. This is really weird, but I understand the concept, and they're using the same section of statute that we did in net neutrality in 2018. In 2018, the reason we did it through a public contracting lens instead of just a full out bringing back net neutrality was because there were some legal issues with that. So they decided to bring back net neutrality in a limited scope, meaning through contracts with public entities. We think that this is comparing apples to oranges and that it's not going to actually solve the issue that we're getting to. We agree that there needs to be more low income rate assistance when it comes to broadband affordability, but we don't think this is the way to do it. So right now I've talked to the sponsor, who is Representative Marsh, who says that there's an amendment in the works for this bill about focusing more on transparency of ISPs who do have low income programs, meaning that they're either available through the OTAP program for households that are low income, and it would be a list published on Business Oregon's website. I'm excited to see that amendment. I do not know when it will come out, but I will let people know through the bulletin and other means. The next bill is House Bill 2654. This bill is interesting. It is trying to expand the use of an already standing electric utility easement for the use of broadband without having to go back and negotiate an extension of that easement, which is kind of disheartening when you think about easement law, where you have to negotiate one-on-one as a utility with the property owner every time you want to kind of add to it, unless you already did that in your original easement. This bill has been brought forth by the rural cooperatives in Oregon, and it is a national priority from their national chapter, and it is passed in a handful of other states. It came out of a lawsuit that happened in Missouri. Right now, the biggest issue we have with this bill is that cities sometimes grant easements on their private property to electric utilities, and it's not clear that this would exempt that property. So we really want to make sure that we get that exempted out. The other thing that's really interesting about this bill that we'd like to see firmed up is the notice requirements, the notice given to property owners. Right now, it's a electric utility can kind of slip it into a bill pamphlet in a leaflet, and that would be easily missed. And so in order to give people the opportunity to get proper notice, we want to make sure that there's something a little bit more strict than that. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just so there are two bills related to open trench notification, also known as like a dig once policy. House Bill 2411 and House Bill 2613. House Bill 2411 would only apply to open trench notification of telecommunications providers by the state when ODOT is doing a project. So that would not affect cities at all. This is a bill that's being ran by Rep. Marsh. House Bill 2613 was a concept that Representative Helt had came up with, but bequeathed it to another legislator when she no longer won re-election. So this bill is similar, but instead of just applying this notification, open trench notification to the state government, it makes it for all state and local governments. So this, in addition to that, it also prescribes very weird permitting requirements and shot clocks when they need to be permitted, and it would apply to any time a city, county, or state government is excavating for an underground utility, road resurfacing, road construction, or anything of the like. Basically, you would have to give 30 days notice to existing telecommunications providers in your right-of-ways that this trench is open, and give them 30 days to respond to that. And then once they do give you, apply for a permit to build, you have 72 hours to turn that around. And it also it preempts cities from requiring details about length and location of a project if it is less than 100 foot or less. So the goal with this was to get conduit in the ground and not dig up streets multiple times. And we understand that, but we don't think that adding preemptive language and applying shot clocks to our right-of-way folks is a helpful way in going about this. So my strategy during session will be to say that we should let the state attempt it first with House Bill 2411, and then maybe we can talk about how we could implement this in a more permissive way for cities in future sessions. The last thing is House Bill 3049. This is a bill brought on by AOC. Currently, counties are preempted from requiring a cost for their construction permits in their right-of-way. This has led to them subsidizing a lot of work by utilities in their roads and right-of-ways. So they're trying to come and get right-of-way permit costs reimbursed. Basically, they want to be paid for their administration costs. This bill doesn't directly really affect us and has a big tendency to open a can of worms about whether or not governments should charge each other. And we've seen in the past bills like this come up that have also gone after city right-of-way authority. So this is a bill that I'm watching very, very closely. because I could see it being taken over and it being pointed at us and to try to preempt us. So I'm watching it really closely. I'm in contact with the folks at AOC about this bill. And then the other thing just to note is that there is a push to amend this bill only to apply to investor-owned utilities. That way, any other muni providers or consumer-owned utilities would not be affected by these permits. And that is all I've got for you guys for now.
Thanks very much, Jenna. So we have literally gone past our 2:30 expected stop time, but we have a little bit of break space in here. Unfortunately, that break space is about 2 minutes, maybe 3, before our legislative lineup comes in. So the pieces that I cover really are transportation, building codes, and wildfire response. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on these. The transportation piece really kind of comes down to supporting a fixed photo radar bill and expanding that use statewide. It's been in place in Portland for the last few years. Senate Bill 395 is a bill that has come forward to essentially drain additional money out of the state highway fund into bike ped facilities, a specific allocation. Back in the 2017 session, there was 1% allocated to bike ped. Essentially because this is a change when we are midstream in the middle of implementing it. This is something that we're going to oppose at this point in time. The building codes legislation that we have been, I'll say, working on administratively, at least in the interim, is we are nearing a point of, I'll say, resolution to be able to keep a third-party building inspection program in place with some additional administrative procedures and requirements. The final piece on the wildfire element really comes down to a whole package of different wildfire bills, ranging from things that are focused in on getting buildings back up and built to areas dealing with zoning and planning and things of that nature, as well as defensible space and home hardening. So we're involved in those conversations. We have been working within a coalition that includes AOC, I'll say Farm Bureau, Home Builders Association, and a variety of other groups that are out there that are interested in this thing. So with that, I want to go ahead and conclude this. My apologies for really not having any time available for some questions here. But what we will do is we're going to probably have some space during this presentation or during these legislative pieces that we'll be able to get some actual questions about. The other thing is you can always email and contact your portfolio manager on these particular issues. So stay online, stay in this system, and we'll be back to join everybody at 2:45. Jenna, is there anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, all of the events before the reception will be on this main line. So you can stay on this Zoom. We're going to take a break so people can do bio break, things like that, get up, stretch. We know staring at computers is long and tedious all day, and it's a long event. So you can stay on here, just mute yourselves, turn off your cameras, get up, stretch, come back. We will be back at 2:45, kicking it off with Assistant Senate Republican Leader Lynn Finley, and we don't want you to miss it. So we'll be back. And if you had any problems joining, we have tried to put links all over the site now in the chat, things like that, to join all of these sessions going forward. So even for the reception, we've updated all of the descriptions with links. So there should be no more technical difficulties trying to get on to any of these sessions. If you have any questions, let us know. Lisa Trevino right now is taking all of our calls. Thank you so much.
So Jim, you'll give a heads up when we're ready to go and when Lynn's here.
Yeah, we got about a 60-second count.
Brilliant.
Perfect. Good updates, Jim.
Yeah, trying to scramble, obviously. Lots of volume to kind of push through in a relatively short period of time.
It's tough when you have 3,200 bills.
Yep. And Mike is
Uh,
locked up with internet.
yeah. Still down.
All right. Well, Keith, since this is your show, we don't have to wait for Mike to unfreeze.
Right. So you tell me when to go.
Okay. Yeah, you can go.
Welcome back, everyone. We would like to thank Senator Lynn Finley, the Assistant Senate Republican leader, for meeting with us throughout the year and working with us on behalf of cities. A bit about Senator. Senator Finley serves Senate District 30, which includes portions of Baker, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Malheur, Wasco, Wheeler, and parts of Clackamas, Deschutes, Lake, and Marion counties. He has been a member of the Senate since 2020. Before that, he was appointed to the House in 2018. Lynn was previously City of Vale City Manager for 5 years. Please welcome Senator Lynn Finley.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate Keith, and it's an honor to be here. The second best thing to be in there in person. So this is as good as it's going to get for you. You know, LOC holds a special place in my heart. As a city manager for a small city, I utilize the mighty strength of LOC and the support in numerous manners. And it was an incredible tool for us. I mean, it's a great organization. One of the strongest parts of that I quickly realized as a city manager was the ranking of legislative issues. And when I first got the memo that it came about and said, we'd like you to rank your legislative issues and send them to us, I thought, why would I want to do that? And so I kind of ignored it for a couple of months, and then I kept getting these frantic calls, and I did it. And what that process put through was great dialogue between the city council and LOC and amongst themselves on developing some priorities and actually thinking about long range stuff, which was an incredible tool. And as the years went through and those priorities went out and we would weigh them against what we thought was the greatest things and what LOC come up with, we found quite often that we mirrored what they were talking about, which thinks, oh man, this is kind of working right. And it was a great tool. So I'm going to visit a little bit briefly about some of the priorities that you have listed on there, because I was able to sneak a copy from Jim. And I'll talk about some of the things that the Senate Republicans are trying to do in that regard. Let me talk first of all about session the 2021 and the challenges that it faces. And no longer do we have the ability to step out of a meeting room or walk to the back of a hearing room and visit with the specialist, visit with the LOC staff, to come to the office and have a cup of coffee and talk about issues. We lost all that capability with our operational programs that we have this year. And it's tough. I mean, I can tell you as a legislator, it makes my job a lot harder to do, because I don't have the ability to bounce things off of everyone in a timely manner. So we have, in the Senate Republican office, we have pushed hard in a lot of regards for a couple of things. One, in the session operations, we pushed hard to allow the building to open back up. I mean, what we believe is if you can go to your local Costco with 1,000 of your closest friends, that you ought to be able to go to the Oregon State Capitol and have some conversations and stay safe in doing so. And that's paramount to what we think. And so we push hard to keep the open and building up. It's pushed hard to have public participation in the hearings. It's pushing hard to have public involvement in everything that we're doing, because we are the people's building. So And the majority part, I would say, has been responsive. They've adapted the rules. You know, it used to be 2 years ago, you could not provide remote testimony on a very easy basis. Now that's a commonplace, which is good. When you look in my district, you know, my district represents 36% of the landmass of the state of Oregon. I'm currently 377 miles from the state capital. So for me to go to work, it's a long drive. And a lot of people that have great input that they can provide to these sessions have not been able to provide that in a remote manner. So this will help that and will allow that to happen. But having said that, but it cuts off all the people that can give us all the great input and review. So as we go through there, the rules have been dynamic. The majority party, we now say, you know, we won't post anything. We won't act on anything unless it's posted for 24 hours until we get to the intimate things. So I encourage people have to track what we're doing in OLIS. And if you're not looked at OLIS before, please look at OLIS. OLIS is an incredibly interactive system that talks about everything that the Oregon State Legislature does. OLIS stands for Oregon Legislative Information System. I know that LOC has trainings on how to use those and links and tools and toolkits. Please look at those because they're a great asset and you can help us through that process. So the session operation and the rules have been dynamic in nature and they continue to change as the majority party works towards meeting some of our goals. So let's talk a little bit about the priorities for the Republican Party, Senate Republicans rather, and how they coincide with LOC legislative issues. You know, specifically LOC, the COVID economic recovery investments. Well, we, the Senate Republicans, talk a lot about, you know, everything COVID. We have a tremendous amount of discussions about COVID, and we've injected and have introduced legislation to deal with a lot of things, specifically COVID related. Let me go back and say that, you know, we have gone through 13, I believe, emergency board sessions since last March, up to as late as January 11th to try to deal with COVID things and direct support. You know, we've pushed out money to cities and counties to help with the economic impacts and economic viability. And as we work towards this now, we have to figure out, I think we have to do better and push harder for the vaccine program. I mean, I think we're not doing as well as we could. I think that the governor has recognized that. And we believe that some of the emergency powers that the governor has utilized have cut some of the folks, the cities and counties, local public health authorities out of the business. So we've suggested some revisions to some of those things, which would make them easier. Another thing that affects the cities, counties, rural, and everybody is the school systems. We've worked hard on all of that. So we want to make sure that schools are open and schools are operational. Some of the other things as far as economic recovery and investments is that we're dealing with is the tax structure, all the new taxes that we're talking about. You know, Oregon doesn't have a revenue problem. Oregon has an expenditure problem. We're going to end this biennium with about $1.8 billion in revenue, ending fund balance, which tells me that we shouldn't go out raising taxes because we have businesses going broke all over this state. We are impacting these businesses. You know, an example, a lot of your businesses in the cities we're requiring them that they have a $300 a month line fee for lottery machines, yet we're not allowing them to turn the lottery machines on. So why are we still doing that? So some of these things don't make a lot of sense that we're trying to turn around and help small businesses. We believe the backbone of the economy in Oregon is small businesses. So having said that, let me go down through my list. The next one is comprehensive infrastructure package. Some of the infrastructure packages that help small business and work with, I worked specifically with when I was a city manager with my representative, was House Bill 2017, the transportation package. As a component of the transportation package was the special cities allotment section of it, which I believe was the best thing that's ever happened to small cities in a long time. We continue to look through that as on the Joint Committee on Transportation. We continue to support that because that gives the small cities an opportunity to run a maintenance program instead of a pothole repair program. That is an infrastructure package that was incredible, and we need to keep looking at it and ensure that it's maintained. There's a resolution out concerning water utilities and rate assistance. Some of the emergency board stuff that we've done have talked a little bit about some social justice and some rate support. We'll continue to look at opportunities to do that. We're trying to figure out how to remove some of the red tape and some of the other avenues that have limited the abilities for some flexibility. Disaster relief and recovery is the last one, and that there's a plethora of things that we've talked about in disaster relief and recovery, fire recovery, the nearly 5,000 residents that were burned in the last Labor Day fire event. So having said that, we actively supported wildfire recovery, wildfire support, wildfire suppression capability increases, and for as much as anything, wildfire reduction of red tape. As we've lost all these, I think 60% of the town of Detroit was burned, and then you go down the McKenzie River Canyon. What that has affected is these structures and communities where they're built fully operational, can't rebuild because of the red tape and the land use stuff. So we're doing our best to try to figure out how to reduce the red tape and allow that to resume. So I'm trying to figure out my time frame. It looks like I'm getting close. I wanted to answer a few questions if you had some, Keith or Jim, whatever. So, I could talk about specific bills till I'm blue in the face and you guys get bored and start throwing stuff at your computer screen. So rest assured that we hear you. We support the small cities. We support the large cities. We support I think we have very common goals in a lot of things. So Jim, I would turn it over to you. If you got any specific questions I could answer, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, sure. We've got a couple of minutes here. So if folks want to raise their hand in this process, and we can see what we can do to get a question in.
Jim, while we're waiting, and hopefully I won't be put on the spot with a question I have no ability to answer whatsoever. But I guess what I'd like to say is that more than ever, citizen involvement's critical. So as there are 2,800 bills introduced in this legislature right now between the House and the Senate, an incredible number, and we're doing more every day. So there's no way that we can keep on top of all those. We have staff that'll drilling into those, but the more eyes are out there, the better. People go through the OLA system and can read and look at those bills and get involved in the system, get involved in the process and let us know. And yes, from yesterday afternoon till about 10 minutes ago, I received 1,800 emails on a specific bill that's coming forward. Well, while that's nice, the bill's not in any committee that I'm on, and then it's a bill that I think is a terrible piece of legislation. So you're trying to convince the same side here. So OLS has a means, people need to register for these committees and provide direct input to the committees on their measures.
Looks like we've got a question here from Anthony Martin.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for being here. I just had a question. You had said that Oregon doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the areas you see that you'd like to improve on that spending problem.
Well, thank you. And what I was in reference to is that we've collected $1.8 billion more than we had programmed. We're taxing small business. A measure, a specific measure is we tax pharmacies for all the corporate activity tax. So every prescription drug the pharmacy sells, we charge them a corporate activity tax on. However, they're given a specific amount that they have to pay for that drug based on state regulations. And through manufacturers reimbursements, they have a specific amount they can sell it for. So we're requiring that pharmacy to eat that cat tax. So those are kind of the things we need to go look and see, how can we support small businesses and how can we spend our money better and leave more money in people's pockets before we take it from them. So that's one avenue. We keep raising fees and structures on other programs. And so I just think that we need to look at, instead of doing the budget cycle is what did we spend last budget cycle? We're going to start with that and add to it. I think we ought to do a zero-based budgeting time and say, what do we really need to do the core mission of that agency?
Okay, great. Let's grab another question here before Senator Courtney gets into the room here. So Joel Litke.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Senator. I'm out of Estacada, Councilor out of Estacada here. My question is, we were one of the cities that was heavily impacted by the fires. We had a lot of residents that take impact there. And so we've done a lot of what we can for the residents here by putting out grants and stuff. I know there's a lot of money that was funneled down from the federal government to help with the wildfires, and there's some money put out from the state. But when will the cities kind of see some of that money come back into them out of the federal government or the state, so we can start to kind of recoup from some of those losses and expenses we had to put out?
Good. Thank you. A great question. I would say that the rules changed significantly December 30th. We received all of the CARES Act funding last year with the full intent that if we didn't spend it by December 28th, you had to send it back to the federal government. Well, they changed the rules and said, no, you can keep the money. But at the same time, they worked on tranche number 4, which is the CARES Act 4, or the funding for that. We're still waiting for the specific rules on that $900,000 or $900 million appropriation. But I would hope to say it would come soon. We know the ability, we know the impacts of cities have had, local jurisdictions have had, and I hope we can support them in a better manner than we've done in the past.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It looks like we're going to need to move on to Senator Courtney, your counterpart in the other caucus. Thank you so much for joining us today. As I've told everybody, this makes it, with this virtual Zooming process that we all have, they actually don't have to drive 4.5 hours, or you don't have to drive 4.5 hours to meet with folks, so you can get on the phone with them. So again, thank you very much, Senator.
Jim, thank you all, and good luck.
Thank you, Senator. Mayor Wojtowski?
Thank you very much, Senator. I'd also like to thank Senator Courtney for showing up today. He's the Senate President, and he's taking time out of a very busy time in order to speak with us. He is the most veteran member of the Oregon legislature, serving in Senate District 11, first elected to the legislature in 1980 as a member of the House. He has been Senate President since 2003, which I will tell you is when I first met Senator Courtney as a 19-year-old legislative assistant in the Senate, and got to know his super fun personality and his humor and wit. His career in public service began as a Salem City Councilor, also serving in that capacity from 1974 to 1980. Everyone, please join me to welcome Senator Peter Courtney.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Mayor?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So this is unusual. I'm just starting to get used to this format when giving talks. I have been using this virtual forever in terms of dealing with individuals, small groups, but I understand there's quite a few people that are on this virtual call. And there is a time limit, so I'm simply going to say for me what this session will be about for me, and that is how to function in a way that I've had no training for, and I think the legislature has had no training for. And we've had 3 special sessions in 2020, but they really did not prepare us for the magnitude of what we are attempting to do as we speak. Today, I'm in the Capitol. I tend to come to the Capitol a lot because I live so close to it. There have been 13 committee meetings that have met so far today, and yet they haven't met in this building. It's totally quiet. And we still got 8 more to meet before the end of this day. So the magnitude of the committee work is as great as ever. But the issue of being a chair and a member of the committee has dramatically changed, because you have to learn to function. You can see people, you can talk to people, but they're not around you. And, you know, for example, I just came in following Senator Finley. And when I talk to people this way, I'm always curious where they're at, whether they're at home, they're in their office, wherever they are. And because that to me is part of now the input process that we're struggling with. Our building is also, as you know, it's closed, but it's closed in a way that we don't talk a lot about, but it wasn't the reason we closed it back in March when the speaker and I closed it. And that is the tremendous threat now to the security of people who are in the building, as well as the threat to the Capitol structure itself. I drive around this Capitol every day, so I see all the windows boarded up, and I see the incredible cement blocks that have been put out front that deny access now in that roundabout, which was always there for the state capitol. And in fact, I was actually there the day they brought the concrete blocks. And so as time goes on, Oregon is fast becoming a fortress, and she will never again be as open as she once was, because even when we come out of this, probably we're going to have to go to metal detectors, as well as many other things. So the great days of being accessible, which I used to brag about, Oregon's capital is more accessible perhaps than any capital in the nation. Those days are now behind us, and it will affect the process. It will frustrate the process. We also are a legislature that has done a tremendous amount in 2020. I was very surprised that we did 3 special sessions, and we've dealt with 13 e-board meetings. That figure alone is extraordinary. And to be able to do that under the situations was a remarkable happening. And this technology that we're trying to deal with, I think we're doing all right. It's hard for me to deal with it. For example, I had to make sure my chief of staff was here to get me on the Zoom, because I like Teams better than Zoom. But like when I deal with the governor, it has to be Zoom. When I deal with the speaker, it can be Teams. And these kinds of things, I still am not that learned about. And so I worry about it. We also are having problems with the fact that there is a political issue here, and it's a big one, and you know what it is. The Republican Party has made the closure of the Capitol a very political issue. And it's hard for me, because I made the decision with the speaker, and it's hard for me to keep the Capitol closed. But I have always worked with a group of 3 infectious disease doctors at the Oregon Health Science University to guide me in terms of at least restrictions in the building that they could accept and are saying that we should do. The issue of the plywood and the concrete, that direction comes from the state police, literally from the state police. So in some ways, I'm dealing now with infectious disease doctors and the superintendent and the state police, as much as I'm dealing with lobbyists or individuals like yourselves, mayors of cities. And that's all new to me. That's all new to me, that I ever would see the day that I have to call the Oregon Health Science University. And I have all the doctor's cell phone number at will to make sure that, you know, I'm doing this right, that I don't want to be arbitrary, but I don't want anybody to get sick in this building. And I worry. And I also don't want anybody to get hurt, because there could have been, had they gotten into the building, state police flat out told us, Peter, a lot of you are going to get hurt, because we cannot just open fire on those situations. We would have had to do things that would have taken us time. And in the process, a lot of you could have gotten hurt. So yeah, the whole school issue, we're going to have to deal with the closure. Vaccines, I had a long talk with my chair this morning of the Veterans and Emergency Services Committee on vaccines, and vaccines involves the issue that really got out of control on us last session, that is vaccines in schools. But now we have the COVID situation. that we don't quite know how it's all going to work out. I am convinced we'll have a vaccine bill voted on the House and Senate floor. Wildfire recovery, even as I speak to you, the Senate President of Gates sent me and others a 3 or 4 page letter just outlining the terrible situation up the canyon from me. And that, of course, is Detroit and Gates and Lyons, desperately asking us to help now. And so the wildfire recovery is going to be with us for a long, long time. We've already stepped up tremendously with e-boards, but clearly not enough. So that is an issue that we're going to be dealing with day and night. The campaign finance, the voters, yourself included, voted to restrict our ability to fund campaigns. So that is another big issue. And I'm worried about it because all these things take attention and they take energy. But operating this way that I'm operating with you today is taking energy. And I'm worried that we're going to make mistakes in some of these issues because we're tired or we're distracted or we run out of time. The budget issue, I won't even get into. That is something that's ongoing. I just had a large discussion with my tri-chairs and the speaker, governor. I want a budget from our tri-chairs right away, and they're fighting it because they're not sure what the feds are going to do, give us more money or not. But I'm very worried we're going to run out of time on that budget if we keep putting off budget decisions until late May or early June. And so those are just a few things that I worry about. I worry about the relationships that are going on. We just had another fight in a committee a moment ago that I was trying to deal with on my phone while I'm talking to the governor speaker. We've had an exchange in another committee yesterday, personalities clashing. People are not in a good mood. People are grumpy. All that plays into this legislative process where we have to get along with each other. However, whether we're together or virtually, and we've got to pass certain bills, we've got to involve ourselves in certain issues. Now, none of this should be strange to any of you because you're mayors of cities. And I know that you're probably meeting remotely and you're dealing with the same thing in your own worlds. So it's a new thing for all of us. And I do hope that enough of us can be calm enough. And I'm not always calm. I got angry yesterday and I had to call up people after to say, I probably should apologize. I got angry last Friday, just give you an example. And so I do think that as a legislator, as a president of the Senate, I have to remind myself now, Peter, the first thing you got to be aware of going into any and all meetings, whether it's this way or whatever, you got to keep your cool. So with that, I'll leave it at that. It's a great time to be in the legislature because this session will be written about for years and years, as will last year. It will be written about, as well as your city council meetings will be written about. How did they do it? How did they survive? How are they able to make government work during such terrible, terrible times? And if you can't make your cities work, we're in deep trouble because I've said to all of you before, I believe you are in the nearest and dearest form of government, local government. If I can't make the legislature work, we're in deep trouble because Congress up to now has not been able to work together on many, many issues, which if they had, I wouldn't have to be working on them at my level. So I don't know. I know that 3:15, someone else gets a handoff. That shows me you've only got 2 minutes. Or 3 minutes, assuming you're going to stay on your schedule, which I think you want to. So any comments or questions or concerns in the short time, I'm willing to take those. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yes, Senator Jim McCauley here. And this was awesome. Maybe one question that would be helpful to address would be if you've got a recommendation on how cities can best, I'll say, have an impact on legislation and some of the bills that are out there. You're muted, Senator.
I wonder how that happens. There's an example. I don't know how that happens. I think you should be very aggressive in identifying bills right now. And you should be very aggressive in talking to legislators as well as calling in. We've had all these procedures are on OLAs, very aggressive and being sure that you're in the queue, so to speak, on everything ahead of time. I would not in any way ask you to wait. I think when you meet with your staffs, your city council staff, city managers, you should say, this is a new situation. And we can definitely testify. And I'm not so sure you shouldn't testify sometimes as an entire city council, which you couldn't do necessarily. But this vehicle would allow you to do that, even though each member of council would be living in a different area, or whatever, or in a house. So I think you should take full advantage of your ability to testify as a city council, bringing in your city managers in ways you perhaps couldn't have done if you actually all had to drive to this building and be here at a given time. So I think you've got a unique opportunity here. I really mean this, to feature all the people on your city council and your mayor, or however you call this council manager, in a way you could not do. And you ought to take advantage of it. If you're smart, that's my opinion, that will have a powerful impact on the bill that you're testifying on and the budget you're testifying on. So I think your city managers, your administrators really ought to tune into how can we do this with the entire council, at least a good part of the council talking. So that's what I would suggest. You got to take it or leave it, but that is what I would suggest that you do. I think it would be very powerful.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was great. We're always looking for recommendations. I know that you value your local council members and mayors. It represents the same constituent group that you have, just a little bit closer to Main Street. So thank you again. We have our next speaker lined up, but we certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, that was great. Next, want to thank Speaker Kotek for being here this afternoon. We know this session is especially hectic, and we do appreciate your willingness to engage with city partners today. Speaker Kotek was first elected to the Oregon House in 2006, serving House District 44, which is North Portland. She was selected to lead the House in 2013 and is now serving her 5th term as Speaker of the House. Before serving in the legislature, Speaker Kotek worked as the policy director for Children First for Oregon and as a public policy advocate for the Oregon Food Bank. Please welcome House Speaker Tina Kotek.
Thank you, Mayor Mays, for the introduction. It's nice to see everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I wish we were in the convention center in Salem having a much bigger conversation, but I'm glad to see so many participants. And I believe you just heard from the Senate President, which is great. So I might be brief because I know he's covered a lot of probably what, the challenges we're dealing with this legislative session. I just think in open remarks, I really want to emphasize 2 things. First of all, thank you for your public service in a very difficult period of our country's history, the world, the state. We're all having to be flexible in very unique circumstances, and you have tough jobs. So I just want to say thank you. Second thing I want to say is your legislature is here to be helpful. We are open for business. We have restrictions because of public health protocols in the building, but we are working very hard to make sure our process during the regular session is as transparent as possible, allows for a lot of robust engagement from the public. And we're trying to utilize every bit of our technology to take testimony, to have more notification of when things are happening. And we're working really hard to make sure we can function, because in a crisis, government has to continue to function. So we are very much focused on the crises of the moment, obviously the pandemic, wildfires, the budget, the lopsided economic recession that we're sitting in at the moment. And you're in the middle of this as well at your level, trying to get your community through this. And we want to be a strong partner with you on that. I had a chance to review your legislative agenda. Very pleased to see the emphasis, and I believe this is not the first time, but the strong emphasis on mental health, behavioral health issues, extremely important, been magnified in the pandemic. The House continues to have its standalone behavioral health committee. Not that behavioral health isn't part of the larger healthcare continuum. We just have felt it's very important to make sure they have their own committee to focus on things. They'll be focusing on the necessary workforce to meet people's needs, investments. Representative Tana Sanchez is our chair of the House Behavioral Health Committee. She has been charged to be the lead in our chamber on implementation of Measure 110 and how we go about doing that. That has implications for the cities as it relates to the redistribution of marijuana revenue. So she's a good person to start talking with. So look to that committee to be our focal point. We're certainly going into budget challenges. We have about a $1.5 billion predicted shortfall in trying to continue current services. And we know we have urgent needs. We have more federal support coming. There's just a lot of unknowns that we are trying to manage through, as I'm sure you are as well in your role at the local level. Housing will continue to be a top priority for my office. There's significant housing investments in the governor's budget as a starting point. We're getting more help from the federal government. We had a housing crisis before. It's just been moved in a different direction, and the challenge is to help folks who are unsheltered as well as just make sure we have enough affordable supply. I look forward to continuing to work with you on that. I will be coming back with the bill to expedite shelter siting, to give more flexibility at the local level to meet the immediate needs around shelter, which of course has been changed with the need for social distancing, and that has just, made a complex problem even more complicated. In terms of how you can be strong partners with us, you've been doing that, right? The interim through the CARES Act money and trying to make sure you could let us know what you need. And while we didn't always have 100% agreement, we were working really hard to make sure we could get resources to local government, to local communities to deal with everything from just your basic budget problems to, economic assistance that is very much needed. One of the things I would ask of you is don't let up, keep telling us what you need, and also help us educate your constituencies about how to participate in the legislative process. We're working on some more user-friendly how-to videos, how to get online, how to use the legislative information system. We have a very comprehensive website, of many of you know, but a lot of people don't know you can watch things either live or, past recordings of all the committee hearings. And the more you can help us get the word out, whether it's budget hearings or redistricting hearings, or there's going to be an opportunity for public testimony in the Wildfire Recovery Committee. We want to hear from people, and you have a key role to play in getting that word out. So we hope you'll be partners in trying to make sure the legislature can function at its highest potential, even in very difficult circumstances. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions for me.
That'd be great. I think we can open it up to questions. So if folks want to raise their hand, we'll go ahead and recognize that. Maybe one thing to start off with, Madam Speaker, one thing I appreciate, because I know we certainly, along with other people, have been a critic during the interim with transparency and meetings and things of that nature. But I think the legislature has really responded this session and provided, I'll have to say, a pretty easy access to providing input and comments and hearings and things of that nature, and that's great. One question I have is, how can a mayor or a council member raise that? I mean, they can drop some comments in, but is there something else that they can do to help emphasize or to make sure that the chair sees it or to make sure that leadership sees it?
A great question. Think about it as kind of, the triple attack there. You want to submit written testimony because some people are, want to be able to go back and read something, and it's important for the record. So that's, if you're able to do that, and don't worry if it's like, you don't have to have long and involved. I will be honest, the shorter and getting to the point of what you need makes it easier for me. But putting in that written testimony, if there's a bill or an informational, whoever your member is, if you're a small town and somebody's district, making sure that member is advocating for you. I've been surprised when I hear specifically from a local jurisdiction that they need something, and either the individual legislator doesn't know, or they just haven't prioritized to tell me. Encourage them to be an advocate for you with my office, with the budget co-chairs. So that's item number 2. And then really, if you are able to testify, even if it's for a couple minutes, popping onto the call for video testimony is really important. So doing all those things will help keep you and your issues top of mind. I think one of the hardest things for us, to be very frank, is email. We are just overwhelmed with emails. And so if you just send an email and like, I'm good, I sent my email, it's really hard to keep track of everything. So think about it in multiple approaches. If there's an issue, try to do all of it. It doesn't have to be long and involved, but if you do multiple things, then it's going to rise a little bit more to our awareness level on your issues.
Okay, that's great. Great recommendation. One question came up here in chat is if you can identify a couple of the COVID bills that you expect to move through this session.
Well, that's a interesting question, because we're starting to see bills around how you would handle pandemics, kind of like in the future, like, well, wouldn't it be good if we had had this in place for the next time? I'm really encouraging people to focus on the immediate needs. So right now for me, that is, as many of you have, when we did the emergency boards and special sessions, which by the way, were highly unusual in terms of their speed and our inability to really have very long process. We're back in regular session. Things will be slower. So don't think about last year as kind of setting the precedent. We're back in a regular session with regular kind of timelines and noticing and things like that. But for the short term, we did have some bridge funding after the CARES Act was supposed to expire. We had about 3 months of spending into the new year to kind of bridge the gap. We will be taking up whether or not we need another 3 months of relief until the federal money comes through. So we normally do a adjustment of the 2-year biennial budget sometime after the February forecast. So sometime in March, we will be readjusting agency budgets and also looking at another potentially 3 months of gap funding. If the new federal packages haven't come through or don't cover them, then we'll have to think of things we need. So if there's something that you know you're going to need for a few months before June, before we get into a new budget cycle, those are the kind of things we need to know about now. So from COVID perspective, it's that. It's also making sure that we are asking hard questions, making sure people's questions are getting answered on response as it relates to testing and the vaccination rollout. We have to be ready and prepared to catch any and all new resources that come from the federal government to get more people vaccinated. And that is a priority right now. So it's not so much bill related, it's just, you know, staying on top of things and making sure we can get the supply out to places that need it.
Okay, great, thank you. Maybe one other question, if you've got the time for this, and this is really more about, I'll say, relationship building. You know, we've spent, obviously, like everybody else throughout this pandemic, struggling and trying to figure out how to maintain contact and maintain our education, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe going forward, if you've got a recommendation on how the league, how its members can work with the legislature, work with leadership to be able to get, I'll say, in front of some of these issues instead of midstream or down the chain, because I think part of maybe some of the frustration that some of our members have is there's a tremendous amount of expertise out there across 241 cities. And to get them involved early on in some of these policy discussions, any recommendations?
I think thanks for the question. I think as an association that represents so many different types of communities, I think sometimes we can get fractured and focusing on needs. I think it's very important for all the cities. Everybody's having, for example, economic Main Street issues. Find that one thing that cuts across the board that you can all, value from and get that out there. The shorter the list, the better. So whether that's a Main Street ask or a housing ask, something that you all need or could use right now, clarity is really important right now, and short lists. Often, this isn't the session for, here's our 15-point list. Now, I will say your 7-point list is actually very reasonable and very concise, and I appreciate that. Keep going in that direction. I'll be really frank with you because, we're in a crisis. Let's not beat around the bush. When we were going through the CARES Act stuff and we had what we thought was a deal with AOC and LOC to deal with how to distribute some of the CARES Act money, I felt like we all made a good faith effort to figure that out. And then it kind of fell apart and we spent a lot of time still having the same discussion over and over again. We all don't have time for that. So if we're not clear when there's an agreement reached, or at least a perceived agreement, then let's make sure we get it right and all try to stay on message so we don't, continue to rehash stuff about, well, we should have gotten this or should have gotten that. Because, from our perspective at the state, we want to work in partnership, and once decisions get made, we need to move forward and try to implement them. We don't have time to continue to rehash everything. And I'll be honest, I wasn't in those meetings, but I think there was a sense of general perception that a deal had been reached, we had it all worked out, and then we were inundated by emails for months about why it wasn't right. I'm like, look, I understand when people are upset, but once a decision's been made, we need to all figure out how to implement it. We cannot have, 300 people trying to make a decision in a pandemic. Once a decision is made, we need to stick to it and try to make the most of the conversation that's happened. So that I'm just being super honest about that. Everyone's kind of at their capacity limit,
Right. No, I think that's good reflection, and I don't think any of us want to repeat I'll say the CRF debate or
Nobody
dialogue.
wants to repeat the CRF drama at all.
Right. So, it's kind of like when I look at hopefully the next federal stimulus package that comes forward. I mean, it's going to be comprehensive. And I think, again, I will say from up front, we would rather have those conversations like now, not after something like that has moved through, so that we're not rehashing the debate and can try to get at least some consensus on a number of issues in advance of that.
Well, Jim, if I could give one example, to the degree that we can plan ahead and anticipate, that was very hard in the beginning of the pandemic. My God, we were all just trying to keep our head above water. But if we can anticipate a little bit more, things aren't getting better quickly, but we have some help on the way. I was getting a preview of one of the package around relief that the Biden administration is trying to get through Congress. And I saw something that caught my eye. It was specific money for water utility assistance. We've heard about that issue. We have local water providers we have people who can't pay their bills. That impacts the ability of the underlying agency to be able to function. We get that. But we don't really have a organized, centralized way to move a whole bunch of money to get people's assistance for their water bills. Well, we better figure that out, because if the feds drop a bunch of money out of the sky for water assistance and we don't have a way to spend it, we'll be taking weeks to get there and spend the money. So if we know that's something we're not ready for, let's anticipate it, talk about how we can figure it out, and be ready to spend the money if it comes. And I've flagged that particular issue for the governor, and they have someone who's talking about it, because they wanted to do that last year in the e-board. And I just we don't even know how to implement that. I know it's just, how do you do that? So it's like anticipating, knowing that there might be help on the way. And if we're not ready to receive that money, let's figure it out so we can catch it and get it out as soon as we can.
No, that's very good. And that's one of the reasons why that was flagged as a priority for us. And Tracy Rutten, as you know, has been working on that issue with the coalition, trying to figure out what that structure looks like. So that's great.
It's absolutely needed.
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank you for your time. This is great being able to do some Q&A here before we move on to our next speaker. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Hang in there. Appreciate you. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Speaker Kotek. I feel like my biased opinion is that the solution to getting money out to water utilities is the same as the solution for getting COVID relief. Give it to the cities. We know exactly where it's needed and how to stand up programs in a big hurry. So I'll kind of tag that on. Thank you so much for your time. I also want to thank Representative Christine Drazen, the House Republican leader, for meeting with us for the last few years, and for her communication during the pandemic and working with us on behalf of our Oregon cities. Unfortunately, she was unable to make it here today, but she did record a message for attendees, and her staff is here to answer questions on her behalf. Let's hear a little bit about House Republican leader Drazen. Shh.
Good afternoon. I'm Christine Drazen, and I represent House District 39. I'm also the current House Republican Caucus leader. Thank you for having me today. While I wish that we were meeting in person, it's my pleasure to be able to be with you in spirit virtually. The League of Oregon Cities has been working tirelessly over the last 12 months to keep our communities running, despite incredibly challenging circumstances. I am deeply grateful for the work that they have done and will continue to do. And I also want to extend my appreciation to them for inviting me to share
Hang on here, folks. We're trying to resolve the volume issue.
sometimes technology is not our friend.
It worked before, right?
Right?
Hey folks, we're switching to another person trying to share their screen and share the video. So we'll give it one more time and see if we can get it to work.
Hello, Mayor Cross. How are you today?
I am doing fine, Mayor Sawyer.
I heard you had a great meeting last night,
Why, yes, we did.
and everybody in Toledo is very happy with their mayor.
I would not agree with that particular statement.
39. I'm also the current House Republican Caucus leader. Thank you for having me today. While I wish that we were meeting in person, it's my pleasure to be able to be with you in spirit virtually. The League of Oregon Cities has been working tirelessly over the last 12 months to keep our communities running, despite incredibly challenging circumstances. I am deeply grateful for the work that they have done and will continue to do. And I also want to extend my appreciation to them for allowing me to share my legislative priorities for this upcoming 2021 legislative session. As you are all aware, our state is facing some of the most challenging times in our history. Between the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the wildfire season, protests, one thing has become abundantly clear. Oregonians are frustrated, many are hurting, and it's time for change. These issues have only been exacerbated for the vulnerable who are too often marginalized in our state, our children, the elderly, women, people of color, and rural Oregonians. The people who are our future, who have supported us in our past, and who are the backbone of our society are struggling. These are the people that I will advocate for in every decision that I make, in every vote that I will take during this session. That is why my priorities are economic recovery for all Oregonians, wildfire recovery for our communities that have been impacted, COVID-19 vaccine distribution, and of course, getting our students safely back in the classroom. First, let me begin with economic recovery for our entire state, the metro region, I-5, and the rural corners of our state. Oregon's small and local businesses have done a phenomenal job of modifying their daily activities and their workflow in order to keep all Oregonians safe. Many have gone above and beyond CDC guidelines in order to slow the spread of COVID in our communities, oftentimes with great financial hardship. So in order to support them, I will continue to advocate for economic recovery in every corner of our state, strategies for small businesses and workforce assistance to help mitigate some of the costs of COVID-19. We must ensure that our rural cities and our towns get their fair share of any state assistance included in this upcoming budget. COVID-19 has created even more housing insecurity throughout our state, and it's very important that we continue to address this at the local level. Cities and towns are already facing escalating rates of homelessness well before the COVID-19 pandemic hit and the wildfire damages impacted our communities. We must be responsive and provide as much support as we can. My personal focus has always been around our unaccompanied youth, and I will continue to advocate for additional funding for homeless youth throughout our state. The impacts of the 2020 wildfire season will have long-lasting consequences on the communities across Oregon, from housing to schools, air quality, water quality. Every corner of the state will have some level of suffering as they were impacted by the wildfire. It won't be long-term. We must make communities whole. We must support families who've been impacted, and I will advocate for legislation that creates efficiency in recovery and rebuilding efforts, budgetary flexibility locally, and investment in infrastructure. Many schools have had to temporarily suspend classes following the wildfires. This factor should not have an adverse impact on their funding. So I am also aligning with my colleagues across the aisle to support special funding for districts that were impacted by lost student attendance due to wildfires. The wildfires also meant the mass destruction of our forests. And because of this, we have to do our work to restore acres of fire damaged trees back into productive forest land. It's the best way to maximize our forest's ability to capture and store carbon. And so I have proposed House Bill 2632, which reinstates the tax credit for reforestation. Finally, COVID vaccine distribution. I remain committed to ensuring that any Oregonian who wants a vaccine will have access to it. Although the distribution has been slow to begin with, we are now seeing progress as our most vulnerable populations and our essential employees are being vaccinated. The state has an obligation to clearly communicate with Oregonians what the vaccine distribution plan is, and then to work with our partners to implement it successfully. Families need the information to make necessary plans, workers need access to vaccines, and of course, we must prioritize our most vulnerable populations. And finally, near and dear to my heart is getting our kids back into the classroom safely. Over the course of the third special session, I advocated for liability protections for schools because schools had indicated that that was a concern that they had, that they would face predatory or frivolous lawsuits. And so the legislature passed liability protections for schools. I'm very proud of that legislation. And now the governor has put teachers in the line to be able to receive vaccines to get our kids back in the classroom. Our children have been among the most quietly impacted of the COVID-19 pandemic. When our schools are shut down and our kids were forced to transition to online learning, it impacted their mental health, their social health, and certainly their academic well-being. So it is at this time that we must begin to move back to in-person learning as quickly as we can. For students who are food or housing insecure, closing our schools also took away the access that they need for meals. Students lack access to high-speed internet, making online learning very, very challenging and difficult. And while school districts reached across their entire districts to address these needs, many students have continued to suffer with an online learning format. Far too many students are falling further and further behind academically because they simply do not have the support that they need to succeed. This is unacceptable. Children are resilient. Many of them will bounce back, but we must get them back in the classroom sooner rather than later. In this challenging time, I can tell you that I will continue to fight for a stronger, more unified Oregon. We will get through this together, and I will be here to listen, learn, and support our communities in any way I can. I look forward to partnering with the League of Oregon Cities in this work. I want to conclude by thanking all of you for your leadership, for stepping up to serve those in these important leadership roles in our communities. Your leadership is critical as we collectively work together to make Oregon a better place to live, work, and raise a family. By working together, we will help Oregon recover, and she will be stronger than ever. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to check and see if there is a member from Representative Drazen's staff that might be online that might be able to take some questions.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? This is Jacob Vanver in the House Republican office, and our Chief of Staff, Mark Cruz, should be on here too.
Yep. Hi, Jim. Awesome. Thank you guys very much for being here. So if we've got a couple of questions, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand and I'll start going down the list.
Yeah, sorry for the hearing test.
Well, it's okay. We'll make sure that we can at least email the link out to folks so they get a chance to listen to it on their line themselves and stuff. So we've got that ability.
Hey, Jim, I have a quick comment for representative staff if you have a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank your office for reaching out. I had mentioned a bill in my coverage, House Bill 2283, that was up today for a hearing, and Representative Drazen staff actually called me out of the blue and reached out to ask if cities had thoughts about the bill, and they wanted to know where we were at. So that is the kind of outreach in these really difficult remote times when normally, I'd be stopping by multiple staff offices and checking in, and it's just so difficult when we're in back-to-back Zoom meetings. So having that outreach and knowing that your office is thinking of local government really means a lot. So just wanted to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Definitely pass that along to the staff. And Jim, for those who had an equally hard time as myself in hearing, I'll just take a quick couple minutes to give a quick synopsis and overview. For those who don't know me, I'm relatively new and I'm actually on the job for 1 month here. My name's Mark Cruz, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief of Staff to the House Republican Office. And I report directly to Leader Drazen. I'm originally from Klamath Falls, Oregon, so I want to give a special shout out to my hometown mayor, Carol Westfall. I'm also a member of the Klamath Tribes, and I'm coming to this office from the United States Department of Interior in Washington, D.C., where I worked as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. And so the comments on the Corona Relief Fund bring back a lot of vivid memories of my time in Washington and working with the tribes and the U.S. Department of Treasury. But I'm excited to be here because we have a fantastic leader in Leader Drazen and an equally wonderful staff. And so I really appreciate the compliment, Ariel, and we'll get that along. And, we want to be service oriented. And one of the things that I've kind of told the staff is I want them to be responsive because right now during the telework kind of phase during session, it's very important that they remain accessible and responsive. And so that's something we're looking to do and hold ourselves accountable to. And on the line, I have a fantastic legislative and policy director, Jacob, and he can answer any of the specific questions. But we do have a wonderful caucus this session. They represent large parts of our wonderful state. And so I know that we have an energy here to work to make the most out of this session. We have challenges on the logistics side, but we're confronting them and because we know that Oregonians out there are hurting right now. And so we're going to work through this and try and be effective advocates for Oregonians. And so with that, hopefully there are some questions and Jacob and I are here to answer any of those.
Great. It's nice to meet you, Mark. I know you're not new to Oregon, obviously, but new to the chamber, perhaps. So
that's right.
I'm sure it's going to be it's probably like a fire hose, I'm sure, right now, process-wise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So got a quick question here from Tim DeSandro, City of Milwaukee, I think, or Medford.
City of Medford. Yeah, I'm council president. Thank you. I appreciate it. My question is, there seems to be a disconnect with the, and this is back to the vaccine rollout, the prioritization of the rollout of the vaccine. And I'll give you an example. School bus drivers and educators have now been moved up in that priority, even though they're not attending school and the buses aren't rolling in most places, where transit coach operators are rolling every day during the entire pandemic have been pushed down to a much further down, lower priority. And that's something I'd like to see advocated for.
I have that noted. Jacob, do you have anything to add?
No, we very much appreciate that input. I believe actually today the Vaccine Advisory Committee will be finalizing their recommendations on what kind of the next stages of the vaccine rollout look like. So hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks we'll get a better idea of what that looks like. But there's always going to be some gaps, and the more that people are there to point out what those gaps are, the more we can refine this plan.
Thank you.
One question for, I think both of you and maybe the caucus office itself, and this is something similar to what I think I've asked before with other leadership offices, is what's your recommendation on how we can have maybe the most amount of influence and how our members can have the influence as far as providing you with details or expertise and things of that nature on any number of different policy items?
Mm-hmm. You want to go first, Jacob?
Yeah, no problem. And I think actually the speaker had a lot of really great recommendations on this earlier. As the person who goes through and reads a lot of the submitted written testimony, my suggestion would be when you're writing a letter, don't bury the lead in the first couple sentences. Put, if you're opposed, put you're opposed. If you're supportive, put you're supportive. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten about 4 or 5 paragraphs in and can't tell whether the person writing in supportive of the bill or opposing. So, but I think the speaker had some good recommendations if you really need to just scattershot all your information, whether it be phone calls to your local representative's office, your senator as well, submitting written testimony on legislation that's important to you, as well as showing up in the virtual environment and giving testimony, or even just shooting an email and flagging bills for staff like me. I mean, there's thousands of bills that are going to go through the process this session, and whenever people reach out to our offices and flag things, it's really helpful to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff of what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other challenge in this environment is just we don't have the luxury of catching people in the hallway or people stopping by our offices for drop-ins. And so what we've found so far is just emails, text messages, and quick phone calls are the most effective way to get information to our legislators, because we're only coming in on Tuesday mornings for a quick floor session. So we've kind of corralled those who do come in on those days to try and get as much information to them while they're here. But we still have a number of members who have long drives, and so they have excused absences. And so text messages, quick phone calls are the quickest way to do it, and then circling back with our staff. That way we can make sure that the information's getting to them both ways.
Okay, fabulous. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this phase up. So again, thank you very much for both Mark and Jacob being able to take on a couple of questions here. Moving on to the governor here in a few minutes, and we want to at least take up some additional questions our members had. So again, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate, the opportunity. Look forward to working with you. So we got about 6 minutes before Governor Brown comes in. She's going to provide some closing remarks and hopefully be available for some questions during her time. So we didn't really get a chance to talk any kind of detail or any kind of questions on some of the portfolio items that our folks have identified. So I'm going to open it up to whatever time we have left before Governor Brown comes in. This is somewhat unexpected. You folks are normally not that quiet.
Right?
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
I put something in the chat too. I appreciated the last comment about the COVID response, and my question is around concerns around medically fragile people. Right now we have vaccines going to medically fragile people who have home health care. However, there are many people that are medically fragile that do not get home health care services, but that are at high risk of mortality. And I'm just curious why our rates or why our strategy isn't going towards reducing mortality first so that mortality risks are reduced, and looking at a systemic approach around fragile people, whether it's people that are battling cancer, serious autoimmune illnesses, HIV, AIDS, all kinds of folks that live and work in ways that you would not know that they have these underlying medical conditions and are not being prioritized right now. I'm just so curious about this from a medical perspective, and as a clinician, it's just kind of honestly blowing my mind.
Yeah, fair question. I think the difficulty for myself and perhaps other folks within our government relations team, none of us have really got a medical background and have any expertise in epidemiology, infectious disease, you name it. And it's hard for us to, I'll say, advocate one way or another on how the state has been approaching this. I mean, we've obviously pushed and tried to get more information out there and more of the decision making. And there's actually some communication that's gone out recently this week to try to get a better handle on how OHA and the governor's office makes their decisions on opening and not opening, because I think when you look at some of those individual metrics from one county to the next, sometimes you're kind of hard pressed on why one county is open and the other one's not, when they seem to have a similar type of metric. Or when you look at trying to compare I'll say a Wheeler County, with less than 20,000 people who live there, with a city who's, dumped in an urban area or something of that nature, and they're both stuck in the same kind of either opening or closing situation. So it's an area that I just don't honestly have the background on, unfortunately.
Well, and that feeds into the question, because even with opening and closing and rates, if you reduce risk of mortality on the onset and how you protect people with the vaccines, then you can look at metrics of rates and areas as they shift mortality when those vulnerabilities are addressed. And I think that we could make a lot of headway if we went in that direction. Anyway, that's my comments. Thank you very much. And I do have medical.
Yeah, no, I could tell. Thank you. There's one question that came in here, and Keith, just a heads up, we're not going to have a break. Obviously, we got 2 minutes before the governor will probably jump into this, but comment from Tim Slater here regarding some grassroots advocacy training. Tracy, do you want to jump on that?
Sorry, Jim, I'm having a little trouble with my computer and internet bandwidth right now. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so the question was about grassroots advocacy training. I know we did that, provided a segment of that, or actually not a segment, a seminar on that when we were in Bend, I think, 2 years ago. Is that something that, I wonder how we could duplicate that?
Yeah, I think that would be a good conversation for us to have internally as a lobby team, because we've certainly had some past trainings, but I will say things are different, and we're still adjusting to try and figure out what this new system looks like. And there were instructions even that came out in the last few weeks about how to access OLIS. And so I think that's a great suggestion, and something where we can, I think, put our heads together to try and look at some of those previous trainings, but I think retool them for what we're learning about this new legislative environment.
One thing that will be helpful, I think, for folks is, again, the state has put together quite a bit of information on how to access the OLIS system, how to provide testimony, sign up, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually a pretty easy document to follow along. And we had that in our bulletin article last Friday. We'll make sure that we get it in tomorrow as part of some kind of a legislative update. And we'll just make sure that we keep referencing that, because I think that'll be helpful for anybody who hasn't had a chance to access this virtual process in the system. So I'm just kind of checking my messages to see if the governor has come in yet. Yes, she is. Mayor Mays, go ahead.
And this is Genevieve for the governor. She will be joining in just about 1 minute here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Genevieve.
Hey, Jim, I'll just also plug that the how to testify in the legislature document that you had in the bulletin article is also in the resources. We will be sending out all of the materials that are in that resource section of our platform tomorrow morning, along with Representative Drazen's video. So for now, if you go to the resources, you can find that. That's a helpful tip, and you'll get it again tomorrow.
Wonderful to see Governor Brown. I want to thank Governor Brown for joining us this afternoon. Governor Brown serving in her second term as governor after re-election this past November. From 2009 to 2015, she served as Oregon's Secretary of State. Prior to serving as Secretary of State, Governor Brown served for 17 years in the state legislature, 5 in the House of Representatives and 12 in the Senate. Please welcome our Governor, Kate Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good to see all of you. I know we all wish we could be together in person, and it's just going to be a little different kind of conference this year. So despite the virtual nature of the event, it looks like you have an extremely full and very productive agenda. And I'm glad I have a few moments to spend with all of you as we begin to settle into the legislative session. I want to say thank you to the League of Oregon Cities, as well as city representatives from every nook and cranny of the state. Thank you for the work that you've done during these unprecedented past 11 months. They've been very, very challenging, I know. And I know at least at the local level, the pandemic has really forced difficult decisions, difficult choices. And I know every one of you is doing your best. What's really important to me as your governor is that I think it's really important that we continue this strong partnership to be able to work together, keep the lines of communications open. Even I know there are going to be times when we disagree. It's also not lost on me that your communities and your businesses have made incredible sacrifices as we work to slow the spread of COVID-19 in Oregon. There is some good news out there. We are largely seeing Oregonians stepping up and doing the right thing to the point where our case rates are coming down. And we didn't see the surge in hospital capacity that we were expecting after the holidays. And I have to say, this is in part due to your efforts in setting the example and amplifying the importance of our statewide and county risk level specific guidance. So thank you for your help in these efforts. As a result of your hard work and tremendous sacrifices made by Oregonians, Oregon now has the 4th lowest case rate in the nation, the 2nd lowest infection rate among seniors, and we're notching up in the vaccine efforts. We're 16th when it comes to the vaccination rate. Like everything else this year, our legislative session looks a lot different. I'm really glad that our presiding officers worked with the Oregon Health Authority and Oregon Health Sciences University to develop a specific health and safety protocols to minimize COVID risks for all of us who work in the Capitol. It's a really important accomplishment. And we've certainly seen both in Congress and in other state capitals how COVID-19 can spread when safety precautions aren't followed. That being said, no one in Oregon has ever conducted a legislative session with virtual committees and carefully planned floor sessions like this. We are all of us are certainly governing in ways we had never imagined. But I think it's so important in this year, more than ever before, that we set aside our political differences to pass a balanced budget and, of course, address the most pressing issues impacting Oregonians. These, of course, are the core values you'll see reflected in my legislative agenda this year. the COVID-19 pandemic response and making sure that everyone has access to healthcare. We will be focused on our communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, our Black, Indigenous, Tribal, Latina, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and communities of color. With regards to wildfire recovery, response, and preparedness, I've got specific investments that will help our communities rebuild that were devastated by last year's wildfires. I really appreciate the legislature's work to invest, at least at this point, several $100 million for these communities to assist in their recovery efforts. My priorities moving forward for wildfire include creating fire-adapted communities with defensible space, responding safely and effectively to fires by ensuring we have the resources to put more boots on the ground, and investing in next generation technology. And of course, preventing fire to the extent that we can by creating healthier landscapes through forest management to reduce fire risks. And I would say the last major bucket item includes answering Oregonians' clarion call for change with a robust racial justice agenda shaped with the input of my Racial Justice Council. The top priorities identified by the council are addressing inequities in education, housing, and criminal justice. Housing, I know we've got challenges in every single community across the state. My budget continues the $250 million investments in affordable housing, homelessness prevention, and rental assistance. I know this is a mere drop in the bucket. Just to give you a perspective, in my last 4 years as governor, we've invested more in affordable housing than we have in the entire history of the state of Oregon all put together. So I know it feels not enough. I will just tell you we're doing the best we can, and we're working to get more money out to our communities to help with this issue. Obviously, continuing to make significant investments in creating a seamless system of education from cradle to career, including fully funding our career and technical education ballot measure, and ensuring that we expand access to quality, affordable early childhood education. And third, of course, criminal justice reform. We have made substantial progress over the last few years. I think it's fair to say that Oregonians are expecting us to do more, and I'm hoping we can partner across the state to make that happen. The Racial Justice Council has 7 bills. I won't go through each one of them, but they cover a broad areas from, as I mentioned, criminal justice to economic opportunity and access to capital. In addition, I have a number of bills, as you might imagine, focused on resilience and emergency preparedness. Senate Bill 288 addresses equity during emergency response. And I just believe that we need to look at emergency response differently to make sure that we are reaching Oregonians who turn to their communities, to all of you in times of crisis, and in turn help you reach all of your community members. So I hope you will consider supporting all of these efforts, but if you only support a few, that's great. As I've mentioned many times before, I do want to touch on a few bills that might be of particular interest. My goal is that our policies, priorities, and budgets reflect and support and honor the communities who bore the brunt of this past year's devastation, primarily our Black, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, immigrant, refugee, Native American, and tribal communities. And that's why I'm introducing several bills that reflect investments that will reach our traditionally underserved, underrepresented, and low-income communities. And I believe that these investments will have a lasting impact on us for years to come. One of these investments is over $100 million in broadband expansion statewide, with $10 million focused on ensuring that our schools have access. This particular investment will connect an additional 50 communities statewide and includes investments in both rural and urban communities that currently lack access. And the investment will be made using a three-pronged approach, community broadband investments through Business Oregon that will allow communities, local governments, and private providers to apply for funds to expand broadband infrastructure. I know several of you have been very innovative and creative around this, but we want to help seed those efforts, so to speak. Number two, as I mentioned, connecting Oregon schools investments. We hope to expand connectivity for about 60% of the schools that need it, and expand broadband over the next 2 years to between 40 and 60 districts and communities that currently have either limited or no broadband whatsoever. And then the third component is an urban connectivity program through Oregon Housing and Community Services that will create a subsidy for urban areas that have broadband access but face cost barriers. I'm also addressing another issue that I know many of our communities are facing, and that's water scarcity and water quality. My goal over the long term is a governance structure that balances state and local interests and prioritize investments in both the built and natural infrastructure, and of course, funding to make sure that we can provide clean water in communities throughout the state. The bill number is House Bill 2170. It's one of our first steps, and it requires our agencies to prioritize water resource projects that include underrepresented communities in their planning. It includes reporting and information gathering to assess whether best practices in water resources projects benefit these underrepresented communities. I mentioned housing, particularly during a pandemic. No one should be kicked out of their home. And I appreciate the long-term, the full-throttled efforts of the legislature to invest in rental assistance over the last several months. We have some restrictions here in providing assistance to people who can't qualify for federal housing assistance, but simply can't afford rental housing in our current state of housing, which is really, we're a high housing cost state. And many folks face numerous barriers to securing housing, like lack of credit and rental history. So we've got a really important pilot to see how this type of support might work, focused on our youth exiting the foster care system. We know that in Oregon, 33% of youth experiencing homelessness were previously in the foster care system. We also know that half of the youth who experience homelessness become adults who are chronically homeless, which means they are more likely to experience severe trauma, poor health outcomes, and repeated engagement with law enforcement. So a lot of work to do there, and House Bill 2163 is the first step. I also know that you are very interested in issues regarding behavioral health. My recommended budget for 21-23 seeks to improve behavioral health services for Oregonians. Much of the work in the budget was informed by our Behavioral Health Advisory Council and then vetted by the Racial Justice Council and our Health Equity Committee. All are aimed at creating a behavioral health system that is simpler to access, more responsive, and yields more meaningful improvements. So the investments include over $100 million in substance use disorder treatment services, crisis intervention, and peer support to help Oregonians recover. Over $100 million to implement ballot measure 110, and $29 million to expand residential services for young adults for peer respite care and to increase fee-for-service rates for behavioral health services. Additional investments in behavioral health, but moving along, I know this is a really important area for us to work together in, and I look forward to working with all of you. I will just say in closing, the 2021 legislative session is certainly going to be a session like any other, we hope, in our lifetimes. And from my perspective, having a successful session means our ability to take concrete steps toward building a more just and equitable Oregon for everyone. Words are simply not enough when it comes to racial justice. Oregonians demand action, and we must take it. And from my perspective, that also means we're going to have to all work together, taking the lessons we've learned from the last year, so we can build back better, improve preparedness, and leave Oregon stronger for the future. So I look forward to a continued good relationship with all of you. Really appreciate your time and energy. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or concerns. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Governor. First, I want to thank you and your staff for truly unprecedented access and communication that we've had between LOC and you and your team. Multiple times per week, staff to staff, every week, your team with cities across Oregon in the weekly meetings. So thank you. We don't always agree, but we're communicating, and that is wonderful. One quick question that I have is, would you be willing to have OHA staff help cities understand the decision-making process for the different levels of opening?
I think I'll just answer that very briefly. Yes. I know that my team has been meeting with you regularly. I'd certainly be delighted to invite the Oregon Health Authority to have them talk about the decision-making. And then Leah Horner from my team has been engaged in that as well. So yes, certainly.
Awesome. Thank you, Governor. We have 7 or 8 minutes for additional questions before the governor needs to move to her next event.
So Keith, I can go ahead and start. There's a couple in chat, Governor. Jim McCauley here. So these are questions that you've certainly seen before, and they essentially do involve, I'll say the opening process. And so one question here is essentially dealing with some of the recreational facilities, gyms, bowling alleys, and this 6 individual max per 500 square feet.
So I think what we've done in Oregon is we've worked really hard to keep Oregonians safe. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have one of the lowest infection rates in the country. When we revised the metrics last fall, we bifurcated a number of businesses because we knew that we assumed that community spread was happening as a result of these activities. And I think the work is really borne out, and the numbers really show that we were accurate. I've heard from a number of small businesses, gyms, youth recreation, and other types of personal fitnesses that reopening indoor operations at least some fashion would get them through until their counties improve their risk level. However, we have said from the beginning, obviously, reopening comes with risk. I am hoping we are seeing our infection rates come down pretty steadily. And I'm hoping over the next 2 weeks that you will see more counties move into a lower level of safety protocol. And if not, if that does not happen, we'll have to take a look at these again in the next couple of weeks. But it's really important. These small businesses are truly the heart and soul of Oregon's economy. I know many families depend on them for their income, for their financial support. We heard directly from folks that even a limited small opening would be useful. So that's what we move forward on. And we're hoping that with the limited reopening, that our case rates will continue to go down and that counties will be moving into lower levels of risk. And we'll be watching carefully. We continue to make decisions based on science and data, and really appreciate the input that we receive from local elected officials, from business owners, and from medical professionals and public policy health experts.
Great. Thank you, Governor. There's a question here that came in from CM Hall, City of Newport. So CM, if you're on the, if you can unmute, go ahead and ask a question.
Sure. Hi, Governor Brown. My question is, we had heard earlier today from a number of Republican members of the legislature about and mentioning social justice in terms of the lens they're looking at for legislative priorities. I just would like to know, you had also mentioned racial justice as a priority. And I guess what I'm trying to get a sense of is are you really seeing that that is crossing party lines? Because I do think that we've met a moment that we need to address. And so I just wonder if you are seeing that across, the state, not just up and down I-5, but urban and rural. Thanks.
Thanks, CM. Good to see you. So here's what I would say. We know that we have diverse communities in every single corner of the state. We have a very strong, active community of Pacific Islanders in Union County. We have, as you know, on the coast, particularly specific Latin American communities that don't even speak Spanish, speak a native Guatemalan dialect. And we know that we are truly a diverse state. And we're going to continue to be welcoming and inclusive to all who call Oregon home. The good news is I see broad interest from both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, and from legislators from communities both small and large to tackle what I would consider these social justice, racial justice issues. I think it's because they all understand that we can build back Oregon better for everyone if we all have the tools to thrive. And so I'm looking forward to this work. We're not going to undo racism overnight. It's going to be deconstructed as we built it brick by brick. But I do think that by working together, we can create a more just and equitable Oregon. And pleased to see the positive response from both sides of the aisle and every single corner of the state.
I've got one more, Governor. Maybe have another couple after that, but I know your hard stop is here in a couple of minutes. So this is a question regarding legislation and programs that would include some training for business owners to be able to get some technical assistance for expansion for online, web, apps, curbside, SMS, things like that. Essentially, some of those helpful things to help them, I guess, weather the pandemic and come out of the pandemic?
So I think the short answer is yes. As I said earlier, these small businesses are truly the heart and soul of Oregon's economy. And I think my commitment, we will be bringing on a new director at Business Oregon, Seporn Chang, and she's really committed to figuring out how we get tools, resources, support to our small businesses and communities around the state to ensure that they can be successful, that they can grow, that they can hire. They're really the job creators in their communities. So one of those tools is obviously access to the internet. In working with a number of advocates over the past year, learned, for example, that a number of these small businesses not only don't have access to the internet, some of them don't have the ability to read. So we have really got to make sure that we have tools that connect with all Oregonians. And that's going to mean making sure that we have different kinds of tools from radio, training, to internet services, to making sure that businesses have access to the internet. So we're going to continue to support our small businesses. Love to hear from all of you about concrete suggestions about how we can do that better. But we're going to have a full throttled effort to get the economy revving up again.
Great. Thank you very much.
I can probably do one or two more if you have time.
Sure. Let me see what else I can find here. Police accountability. Any comments on police accountability?
Sure. I think what all Oregonians deserve is making sure that we have both a law enforcement system and a criminal justice system that is both just and equitable. And what we know right now is that our both from the treatment of law enforcement and from the impacts the data shows from our criminal justice system is that certain Oregonians are treated differently in that system, and that needs to change. After the death of George Floyd, I tasked Constantine Severe. He's my public safety policy advisor. We have put together a work group that is taking a look at both the training and the accountability measures that happen at the state level. The Department of, I'm not even going to get the initials right, DPSST does the training for all of the state's law enforcement. And we want to make sure that training is helps people understand implicit bias, that it provides our law enforcement officers with the tools that they need. And so I expect that work group to come up with both specific statutory changes as well as administrative changes that can ensure that we are doing a better job training law enforcement in the state, as well as when there are issues that we are holding folks accountable. And there will be legislation that comes from my Racial Justice Council reflecting this work. I also know that there are legislators, People of Color Caucus has legislation to tackle this issue as well. Obviously, we train at the state level, and then the local jurisdictions then do follow-up training. We want to make sure that we set a baseline and do this right for all of our communities.
Thank you very much. I think Mike wanted to make a couple of quick comments.
Sure.
I just pulled rank on Jim and said, you've got to give me a second to thank you personally for your partnership with us, and to let you know that Leah is amazing. She's been there for us every week, steadfast, and has always been really accessible. So thank you. And so important, we've already met with her with Business Oregon, pledged our support, and look forward to working with her. But just a quick thank you from me to you. So I want to turn it back to President Mays.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Governor. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to speak with us today, taking our questions, and being so accessible to us, working to partner with us year-round. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you during this legislative session as well to advance Oregon.
Thank you, President Mays, and great to see that there's sunshine in Sherwood and all of your communities. Look forward to a strong and continued partnership. Please stay safe out there and take good care.
Thank you, Governor. So I'm going to have Jenna come on board and walk folks through break time, and then also coming back on at 5 o'clock tonight.
Okay, I'm trying to get there we go.
There you go.
So I'll let Mayor Mays have the last word, but before he closes us out, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are doing a legislative reception, a little bit different than we have in the past. It'll be a regional breakout room. You can go back to the platform. There are links everywhere, hopefully, so you can join those. I also sent an email about 30 minutes ago to every attendee with direct links to those regional breakout rooms. We've got about 40 legislators who have responded and RSVP'd for the reception. So you should check out your regional breakout and go there. And if you have any questions in the meantime before 5 o'clock, let LOC staff know.
Great. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you to all attendees on behalf of the League of Oregon Cities and the Oregon Mayors Association. This year, we couldn't do personal visits with legislatures, but we do hope all of you are able to find the time very soon to meet with your senators and representatives to make them aware of your city's priorities. Let the LOC staff know if they can be of help in any way. They're here to help all of us. Reminder to please help us make City Day a positive experience for all participants by completing the online feedback survey that will be distributed via email in the next few days. We always want to make things better hopefully we will not be doing another pandemic version anytime soon, but hope to see everyone at the reception in a half an hour. All right.